I am Clara, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant trained to spot liars and trace stolen money. I thought my career made me immune to deceit, but the greatest fraud of my life was the man I was supposed to marry in exactly 72 hours. Last Thursday, I stopped by my future mother-in-law's Connecticut mansion to drop off the final wedding seating charts. As I was leaving, I realized I had left my phone inside. When I walked back to grab it, I overheard a hushed conversation that made my blood run cold. My perfect fiancé and his elegant mother were discussing the hush money they just sent to his secret family and their plan to let me take the fall for a federal crime. I did not scream or cry. I simply picked up my phone, which had been recording everything, and decided right then to meticulously destroy their lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your reality shattered by the very people who claim to love you, and stay tuned for a masterclass in revenge. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky over Connecticut was a bruised, heavy purple threatening a downpour that matched the suffocating anxiety I had been feeling all week. I had driven out to Beatrice's estate, a massive Tudor mansion that screamed old money, to drop off the seating charts for the reception. Beatrice was a woman who demanded perfection. At 62, she carried herself with the terrifying grace of a monarch. Her silver hair flawlessly coiffed, her gaze looking down her nose at me. I was just the working-class girl who had managed to snag her golden boy, Nate. Nate was 35, the managing director of a boutique venture capital fund, and to the outside world, he was flawless. He wore bespoke suits, remembered everyone's birthdays, and charmed my family within minutes of meeting them. When we got engaged, Beatrice made it her personal mission to remind me how incredibly lucky I was to be elevated into their social stratosphere. "Just leave the charts on the credenza, Clara," Beatrice had sighed when I arrived, barely glancing up from her tablet. "I will have the caterer double-check your work. We cannot afford any of your little organizational mishaps in front of Nate's investors." I swallowed the humiliation, smiled tightly, and walked out to my car. It was not until I had my hand on the steering wheel that I realized my pocket was empty. My phone was still sitting on the entryway table next to the seating charts. I jogged back up the grand stone steps. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, intending to grab the phone and vanish before Beatrice could offer another critique. But as I reached for my device, I heard voices echoing from the formal dining room. It was Beatrice, and to my surprise, it was Nate. He was supposed to be in Manhattan finalizing a portfolio review. "Did you wire the hush money to Rachel?" Beatrice's voice cut through the quiet house, sharp and urgent. It was not her usual polished drawl. This sounded like panic. I froze. My hand hovered an inch above my phone. "Rachel. I did not know a Rachel." "It is done, Mom. I sent it through the offshore proxy this morning," Nate's voice replied. The warm, affectionate tone he used with me was entirely gone. He sounded exhausted and completely callous. "She agreed to keep the kids out of state until after the ceremony." The kids. The air vanished from my lungs. The marble floor suddenly felt like it was dropping away beneath my feet. I pressed my back against the cold wall of the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You need to keep it together, Nathaniel," Beatrice snapped. "This wedding has to go off without a hitch. The SEC has been sniffing around the fund's escrow accounts all week. If those investors pull out before Monday, we lose the house, the fund, everything. I know what is at stake." Nate fired back, a sudden vicious anger in his voice that I had never heard in the 2 years we had been together. "That is why I am marrying her, is it not? Once I sign that marriage certificate, Clara's spotless accounting license and her family's LLC will automatically absorb the fund's debt. Her credentials will legitimize the shell company. By the time she realizes the LLC is collateral, the auditors will be chasing her, not me." And then Beatrice asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my blood run cold. And then Nate said, letting out a dark, cynical laugh that made me physically nauseous, I let Clara take the fall for the missing $4 million. I file for divorce, cite her financial negligence, and take the private jet to the Caymans with Rachel and the twins. I am sick and tired of playing the doting fiancé to a boring middle-class spreadsheet jockey. 3 more days, Mom. 3 more days and we are clear. I did not scream. I did not burst into the room weeping and throwing things. A lesser woman, or perhaps a woman who had not spent the last 8 years dissecting the psychology of white-collar criminals, might have confronted them right there. But the forensic accountant in me took over. The part of my brain trained to look at a burning building and calmly calculate the origin of the fire simply switched on, chilling my veins to absolute zero. My fiancé did not love me. He did not even respect me. I was a human shield. A sacrificial lamb carefully selected, because my professional credibility and my late father's modest debt-free LLC were the perfect cover for his Ponzi scheme. He had a secret family. He had a mistress named Rachel, and he and his mother were actively conspiring to send me to federal prison. With agonizing slowness, my hand descended. I picked up my phone from the table. By sheer force of habit, my phone had been recording audio. I use a background dictation app to record my verbal notes while driving, and I had not turned it off when I walked into the house. I tapped the screen, saving the last 10 minutes of audio to my secure cloud drive. I did not make a single sound as I backed out of the heavy oak door. I pulled it shut. I walked down the stone steps, my vision tunneling, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my car door. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat in the deafening silence of my sedan as the first heavy drops of rain began to strike the windshield. I was not going to cry. I was going to ruin them. The drive back to the city was a blur of flashing brake lights and gray rain, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. Every sweet nothing Nate had ever whispered to me, every grand romantic gesture was suddenly illuminated under a harsh fluorescent light. I saw them for what they really were. They were calculated deposits into a bank of my trust, an emotional investment he intended to violently cash out. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced over. It was a text from Nate. Just wrapped up the portfolio meeting in the city. Heading back to the apartment now. Miss you so much, baby. I cannot wait to call you my wife on Saturday. A wave of pure, concentrated bile rose in my throat. He was still at his mother's house in Connecticut. He had just finished explaining how he was going to frame me for a federal crime, and now he was effortlessly slipping back into the role of the perfect loving partner. The sociopathy of it was breathtaking. With hands that were completely steady now, I picked up the phone. I knew that if I ignored him, he would get suspicious. Narcissists are incredibly attuned to shifts in behavior. They rely on their victims' predictable compliance. I had to give him exactly what he expected. Miss you too. The seating charts are all dropped off. I am just heading home to pack for the rehearsal dinner. Love you. I tossed the phone back onto the seat. 2 years. 2 years of my life surrendered to a phantom. I thought back to how we had met. It was just a few months after my father had passed away from a sudden stroke. I was utterly devastated, drowning in grief, and trying to manage the small family-owned real estate LLC my father had left behind. Nate had appeared like a knight in a bespoke suit at a charity gala. He was attentive, overwhelmingly supportive, and seemingly obsessed with me. He listened to me cry about my dad. He brought me coffee at work. He slowly and methodically isolated me from my casual friends by monopolizing all of my free time, claiming he just could not get enough of me. I had thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Now, applying the forensic lens to my own life, the pattern was glaringly obvious. He had not targeted me because he loved me. He targeted me because I was vulnerable, grieving, and sitting on a clean, legally unblemished LLC. The company my father built held several commercial properties that were fully paid off. It had a flawless credit rating. It was a pristine financial vessel, completely disconnected from the toxic sludge of his venture capital fund. I was the perfect patsy. He mirrored my interests, echoed my values, and created a fake persona designed specifically to infiltrate my life and gain control of my assets. The gaslighting had been so subtle, so masterfully executed, that I had handed over the keys to my father's legacy with a smile on my face. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, I did not go inside immediately. I sat in the damp cold of my car, pulled up my secure cloud drive, and played the audio file. I needed to hear it again. I needed to ensure I had not hallucinated the entire conversation out of pre-wedding jitters. Once I signed that marriage certificate, Clara's spotless accounting license and her family's LLC will automatically absorb the fund's debt. Nate's voice, cold and sneering, filled the quiet cabin of my car. I listened to it 3 times. The mention of the SEC was the most critical piece of intelligence. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not just sniff around boutique venture capital funds unless there are massive glaring discrepancies in their filings or someone has filed a whistleblower complaint. Nate's fund was known for dealing with high net worth individuals. If $4 million was missing, he was running a Ponzi scheme. He was using new investor money to pay off old investors, and the music was about to stop. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what a $4 million deficit meant. It was not a simple accounting error. It was a catastrophic structural collapse. He needed a scapegoat to take the fall when the federal agents finally came knocking. But the most insidious part of his entire operation was the prenuptial agreement. A month ago, Nate had brought up a prenup. He framed it beautifully, of course. He told me his investors required partners to sign standard asset protection forms. He insisted it was just boilerplate legal jargon to protect the fund. He even looked me in the eye and swore it actually protected me too, making sure his corporate liabilities never touched my personal accounts. He had handed me a massive 80-page document. I had skimmed the standard clauses about alimony and property division, found them generous, and signed it. I had trusted him. I had shut off my forensic brain because he was the man I loved. It was the most dangerous mistake of my professional life. I grabbed my bag, marched up to my front door, and unlocked it. I bypassed the kitchen entirely and went straight to my home office. I booted up my encrypted laptop and pulled the digital copy of the prenup from my email archives. I needed to find the exact mechanism he was using to trap me. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon, my eyes scanning the paragraphs with renewed focus. I had to uncover the hidden trapdoor he had buried in the text. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was laser-focused. He thought his elite Manhattan lawyers had crafted an inescapable snare wrapped in wedding vows and false promises. He assumed I would be too busy picking out floral arrangements to notice the financial guillotine swinging down toward my neck. He was wrong. He forgot that uncovering financial deception was literally what I did for a living. I stared at the flashing cursor on the 80-page document. My eyes were burning, but I knew I could not do this alone. I was too emotionally compromised. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person I trusted completely. My younger brother, Lucas, or more specifically, Lucas's wife, Naomi. Naomi is an African-American corporate litigator who works for one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in the state. She is brilliant, fiercely protective of our family, and possesses a terrifying ability to spot legal traps from a mile away. More importantly, Naomi had never liked Nate. She had always maintained that his charm was too rehearsed, like a salesman trying too hard to close a deal. I used to defend him. Today, I was going to prove her right. "Hey, Clara." Naomi answered on the second ring, the sounds of a bustling office in the background. "Everything okay?" "Do not tell me." Beatrice complained about the napkin rings again. "Naomi," I said, my voice trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving a cold, sharp focus in its wake. "I need you and Lucas, right now. I need you to drop whatever you are doing and meet me at your house." And Naomi, "Yeah." Her tone shifted instantly, catching the gravity in my voice. The background noise vanished as she likely stepped into a private conference room. "Bring your laptop. Nate is running a Ponzi scheme. He has a secret family, and he is planning to frame me for federal fraud on Saturday. There was absolute silence on the line for 3 seconds. Then Naomi's voice returned, dropping an octave into pure litigator ice. I always knew that bespoke sociopath was hiding something. Come to our place. Use the back alley entrance. Let us dissect this bastard. The rain was coming down in thick, blinding sheets as I threw my encrypted laptop, a stack of financial ledgers, and my engagement ring into a waterproof tote bag. I drove across town with deliberate caution, my mind rapidly organizing the chaotic fragments of the past 2 years into a chronological timeline of deceit. I pulled into the narrow alleyway behind their restored brownstone. Lucas was already standing by the back gate, holding a large umbrella. The moment I stepped out of the car, he pulled me into a tight, protective hug. He did not ask how I was feeling or offer empty platitudes. He just took my heavy bag and ushered me inside out of the freezing rain. Inside, their dining room had already been transformed. The usual centerpieces and placemats were gone. Naomi was standing at the head of the long oak table, her sleeves rolled up, flanked by yellow legal pads, highlighters, and a steaming pot of black coffee. She looked exactly like a general preparing a battlefield map. There was absolutely no pity in her eyes, only a sharp, predatory focus that immediately grounded me. "Sit," Naomi ordered, pointing to a chair. "Tell me exactly what you heard. Do not skip a single syllable. Do not sugarcoat it. I need the raw, unedited facts." I sat down and recounted the entire conversation I had overheard in Beatrice's foyer. I repeated the words exactly as they were spoken. The hush money wired to the offshore proxy, the secret mistress named Rachel, the hidden twin children, the Securities and Exchange Commission investigating the fund's escrow accounts, the explicit plan to use my accounting license and my late father's LLC as a shield to absorb the debt. When I finished speaking, I placed my phone on the table and played the audio recording for them to hear the raw evidence. Lucas clenched his fists, his jaw tight with silent fury. Our father had built that LLC from the ground up, working 70-hour weeks to secure our future. The thought of Nate using our dad's legacy to cover his criminal tracks made my brother shake with visible anger. He paced the length of the room, his breathing heavy. But Naomi remained perfectly still. She listened to the recording a second time, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the massive legal implications of Nate's words. She was analyzing jurisdictions, corporate liabilities, and federal statutes in real time. "He is a sociopath," Lucas finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "I am going to find him, and I am going to kill him." "You are not going to do anything of the sort," Naomi snapped without looking up from her notepad. "Violence is messy, and it gets you arrested. We are going to do something much worse. We are going to dismantle him legally, financially, and publicly. We are going to let the federal government do the dirty work, and we are going to make sure he spends the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary." Naomi turned her piercing gaze to me. "Clara, you need to turn off the part of your brain that is grieving a lost relationship. The man you thought you were marrying does not exist. He never existed. He is a financial parasite who targeted you for your assets. Right now, you are not a betrayed fiancé with a broken heart. You are a forensic accountant facing a hostile corporate takeover. We need to treat this like a war. We need to be cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless." I nodded, feeling the last remnants of my heartbreak harden into pure tactical resolve. She was entirely right. Crying over a fabricated romance would only give Nate exactly what he wanted. I needed to be colder and sharper than he could ever anticipate. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out my engagement ring, and placed it on the table. It was no longer a symbol of love. It was a piece of evidence bought with stolen investor funds. "Good," Naomi said, noting the shift in my posture. "Now boot up that laptop. We need to dissect this prenuptial agreement line by line. Nate and Beatrice think they have boxed you in, but arrogance always leaves a paper trail. They rushed this. They assumed you would be blinded by the wedding preparations and the illusion of a perfect life. Let us show them what happens when you hand a fraudulent contract to a room full of people who actually read the fine print." Lucas poured us all black coffee, sliding a mug in front of me. "Whatever you need, Clara. Tell me what to do. I am with you until the end. I need a concrete timeline, Naomi instructed, taking absolute charge of the room. The wedding is on Saturday. Today is Thursday night. That gives us less than 48 hours to find the trapdoor in this contract, secure your personal assets, and build an airtight case for the federal authorities. We have to map out his entire corporate structure before you face them at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. I opened my laptop and entered the decryption password. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a pale glow over the stacks of paper. I pulled up the 80-page digital file of the prenuptial agreement Nate had handed me weeks ago. It was filled with dense, convoluted clauses designed to exhaust and confuse the reader. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar rhythm of legal and financial analysis take over my mind entirely. He mentioned the LLC explicitly on the recording, I told Naomi, pointing to the screen. He said that once we sign the marriage certificate, the LLC will automatically absorb the fund's debt. That means there has to be a specific operational clause buried deep in here, something that shifts liability without triggering a standard audit or requiring a separate board approval. Naomi pulled her chair closer to mine, her eyes scanning the digital pages with lightning speed. Let us start with Section 4, focusing on asset commingling and corporate liabilities. If his lawyers are as sneaky as I think they will not call it an absorption. They will frame it as a mutually beneficial asset management strategy. Search for terms related to fiduciary consolidation or cross-collateralization. We fell into a synchronized rhythm, two professionals executing a high-stakes forensic autopsy. The emotional weight of the betrayal was pushed aside, replaced by the sheer adrenaline of the hunt. Every paragraph we read, every legal term we decoded, was a critical step toward our survival and his ultimate destruction. The rain continued to batter the windows of the brownstone, but inside the dining room a meticulously calculated storm was brewing. Nate thought he had trapped a naive, grieving daughter. He had no idea he had just declared war on a family that fought back. We worked in absolute silence for the first 3 hours. The only sounds in the room were the heavy rhythm of the rain hitting the glass, the frantic clicking of Naomi scrolling through digital pages, and the occasional scratch of my highlighter against printed physical copies. We were dissecting 80 pages of the most aggressively dense legalese I had ever seen. Nate's attorneys had built a labyrinth of misdirection. The first 20 pages were exactly what he had promised them to be. They contained extremely generous clauses regarding alimony, property division, and healthcare directives. It was a brilliant smokescreen designed to lull a trusting partner into a false sense of security. If you saw how much he was supposedly willing to give you in the event of a divorce, you would feel guilty for questioning the rest of the document. I rubbed my burning eyes and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. Lucas was pacing the perimeter of the room, reading over our shoulders and keeping our mugs full. We reached page 30, then 35, then 40. Nothing stood out. I was beginning to wonder if the trap was hidden in a separate corporate filing he had yet to show me. Then Naomi stopped abruptly. Her finger tapped the screen. She leaned in so close her nose almost touched the monitor. "Go to page 42. Naomi instructed, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "Look at Section 9, subsection D, paragraph 4. It is buried under a heading titled Administrative Synergies and Household Wealth Management." I quickly scrolled down to the exact paragraph. At first glance, it looked like standard language about combining our tax filings to maximize deductions. But as I read it a second time, applying the cold analytical skills of my profession, the words began to shift and warp into a financial death sentence. "Read it aloud," Naomi said, her eyes fixed on the screen. I cleared my throat and read the text. "Upon the legal execution of this marriage, any and all privately held limited liability, companies managed entirely or in part by either spouse, shall immediately enter a state of fiduciary consolidation with Blackwood Capital Management. For the purposes of streamlined portfolio administration, all assets, liquid capital, and outstanding credit lines associated with said LLCs will automatically serve as cross-collateralized guarantors for the primary fund's existing and future liabilities." I stopped reading. The air in the dining room turned instantly frigid. Lucas stopped pacing. He looked between the two of us. Translate that into plain English for me. What does that actually mean? It means he weaponized the wedding vows, Naomi explained, turning to face him. The second the officiant pronounces them husband and wife, Clara's family, LLC, ceases to be an independent entity. It automatically becomes a financial guarantor for Nate's venture capital fund. It legally fuses your father's clean, debt-free company to Nate's toxic sinking ship. My stomach plummeted as the full architectural brilliance of the fraud laid itself bare in my mind. He is not just stealing the LLC, I whispered, staring in horror at the glowing screen. He is using it as a life raft. He told Beatrice that the SEC was investigating his escrow accounts because $4 million was missing. When federal auditors look at a venture capital fund, they demand to see sufficient collateral to cover investor capital. Right now, Nate's fund is running on fumes. He has nothing. But the moment we get married, this clause activates. Naomi nodded grimly. Exactly. The moment you sign the marriage certificate, your father's commercial properties and pristine credit rating are instantly pledged against the missing $4 million. Nate can show the SEC auditors the consolidated balance sheet. The fund will suddenly look solvent because your family's assets will be artificially inflating his bottom line. And when the Ponzi scheme finally collapses anyway, Lucas asked, his voice shaking with restrained rage. What happens to Clara? I answered him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I take the fall. Nate is the managing director of the fund. But this clause specifically structures the absorbed LLC as the primary guarantor of the debt. If the investors sue, or if the federal government indicts the fund for fraud, they will go after the guarantor first. They will liquidate my father's properties to pay back the people Nate stole from. And because the LLC is in my name, and I am a licensed financial professional, the authorities will assume I was fully complicit in laundering the money. Naomi leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. He will claim he had no idea the money was missing. He will say his new wife, the brilliant forensic accountant, was secretly managing the books and transferring funds through her family company. He will file for divorce, cite your criminal negligence, and walk away clean while you face federal prison time. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. It was not just a scam, it was a meticulously designed character assassination. Nate had spent 2 years studying me, learning exactly how my father had structured our family business, and mapping out the precise legal route to steal it. I suddenly remembered a weekend last autumn when Nate had offered to help me digitize some of my father's old filing cabinets. He had spent hours scanning documents, claiming he just wanted to make my life easier. He had stolen the articles of incorporation, the tax identification numbers, and the deed records right under my nose, while I thanked him for being so supportive. We have to cancel the wedding, Lucas said emphatically. You cannot go anywhere near that altar, Clara. We call the guests tomorrow morning. We say there was a sudden emergency. No, Naomi countered instantly. If Clara cancels the wedding now, Nate will realize she knows. He is a cornered animal facing federal prison. If he suspects Clara is on to him, he will destroy the evidence, liquidate whatever cash he has left, and flee the country with Rachel and the twins before the SEC can issue an arrest warrant. He will vanish, and the investors he defrauded will be left with nothing. Naomi was right. Canceling the wedding was the instinct of a victim. I was not a victim anymore. I was an accountant preparing an audit. We do not cancel the wedding, I said, looking from my brother to my sister-in-law. We let him believe the plan is working perfectly. We smile, we play our parts, and we attend the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. But to bury him permanently, we need more than just a malicious prenup. A bad contract proves he is greedy, but it does not prove he stole $4 million. It does not prove the existence of the offshore proxy accounts or the secret family. We need the hard financial data. We need his ledgers. Where does he keep them? Naomi asked. He is incredibly paranoid about cybersecurity, I explained. He never leaves critical fund data on cloud servers. He keeps everything on a highly encrypted external hard drive. It never leaves his sight. He carries it in his briefcase everywhere he goes, even to family dinners. Tomorrow is the rehearsal dinner, Naomi mused, a dangerous smile touching the corners of her mouth. He will be distracted. He will be busy playing the perfect host to his wealthy investors. I nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline replacing my exhaustion. The investors are attending the rehearsal dinner. He invited them to show off his new bride and reassure them that their money is safe. He will be working the room. His briefcase will be in his hotel suite. I know his security habits, and I know how to bypass his encryption if I can get physical access to that drive. You are going to break into his room during your own rehearsal dinner, Lucas stated, shaking his head in disbelief. I am going to excuse myself to fix my makeup, I corrected him. And then I am going to download every single piece of dirty financial data he possesses. We have 48 hours until the wedding. By the time I walk down that aisle, I will hold the keys to his destruction. By the time I walk down that aisle, I will hold the keys to his destruction. The rehearsal dinner took place on the top floor of the Belvedere Club, a private establishment where the membership fees alone cost more than my first car. The room was a masterclass in aggressive wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over tables draped in heavy imported silk. The floral arrangements were towering cascades of white orchids and rare lilies, purchased entirely with stolen funds. I stood near the entrance wrapped in a designer ivory gown that Nate had insisted on buying for me. He wanted his future wife to look the part. He wanted me to look like a valuable corporate asset. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and carefully scanned the room. The guest list was heavily skewed toward Nate's professional circle rather than our actual friends or family. He had invited his top-tier investors, the very people whose money he was currently funneling into offshore accounts for his mistress. They stood in tight clusters swirling aged scotch and laughing loudly at Nate's jokes. They looked at him with absolute trust. He was their golden boy, the financial prodigy who promised them double-digit returns in a volatile market. I watched him effortlessly work the room, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, and projecting an aura of total invincibility. He was a predator in a tailored tuxedo, and I was the bait he was using to keep the sharks at bay. Lucas and Naomi stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, perfectly executing their assigned roles. Lucas wore a sharp charcoal suit, chatting politely with one of Nate's junior partners. Naomi was a vision in emerald green silk. As an African-American corporate litigator who navigated rooms full of arrogant, wealthy men on a daily basis, she commanded attention without even trying. She caught my eye from across the room and gave a microscopic nod. We were in position. The battlefield was set. More importantly, I noticed what was missing. Nate's signature biometric briefcase was nowhere to be seen. He always carried it to business functions, but tonight, playing the role of the devoted groom, he had left it behind. I knew exactly where it was. It was sitting on the heavy mahogany desk in the penthouse bridal suite 3 floors above us, waiting for me. Nate caught sight of me and immediately excused himself from a group of hedge fund managers. He crossed the room, his eyes shining with manufactured adoration. He wrapped an arm around my waist and kissed my temple, a picture-perfect display of affection for anyone watching. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Clara," he whispered against my hair. "I am the luckiest man in the world tonight, and in the I smiled up at him, forcing my facial muscles to convey nothing but bridal bliss. "I am so lucky too," I replied, keeping my voice soft and breathless. My stomach churned with physical revulsion, but I did not break eye contact. I let him see the devoted, naive woman he thought he had successfully manipulated. He squeezed my waist and turned me toward the center of the room. "Come," he said loudly. "My mother wants to make a toast before they serve the first course." The guests began to filter toward their assigned tables. I took my seat next to Nate at the head table with Beatrice seated directly to his right. She wore a severe tailored dress of midnight blue, a string of flawless pearls resting against her collarbone. As the waitstaff finished pouring the vintage wine, Beatrice tapped a silver spoon against her crystal flute. The sharp ringing sound instantly silenced the room. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and projected a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "Family, friends, and esteemed colleagues," Beatrice began, her voice carrying that distinct polished drawl of generational wealth. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate a union. Tomorrow, my exceptional son, Nathaniel, will take a wife. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the crowd before landing heavily on me. The smile on her face sharpened into something incredibly cruel. Beatrice was about to perform her favorite party trick. She loved to publicly dismantle my background while making it sound like a compliment. It was a vicious form of social warfare designed to remind everyone in the room that I did not truly belong among them. When Nate first told me he was marrying Clara, I must admit I was surprised. Beatrice continued, her voice echoing through the silent dining room. Nathaniel has always been surrounded by women from our specific world. Women who understand the complex demands of high finance and the heavy burdens of legacy. Women groomed for the elite circles of this city. And then he brought home a humble accountant. A ripple of uncomfortable, polite laughter moved through the tables. Naomi shifted in her seat across the room, her eyes narrowing. Lucas gripped his water glass so hard his knuckles turned white. I placed my hand over Nate's on the table, maintaining my serene expression. Beatrice took a slow, theatrical sip of her wine. But Clara is a hard worker. Her late father, bless his heart, ran a quaint little local business. A very modest real estate operation. He was a blue-collar man who taught his daughter the value of a solid, ordinary paycheck. It is quite endearing, really. Nathaniel has always had a charitable heart. He has always wanted to lift people up. And seeing him rescue Clara from a life of mundane spreadsheets to bring her into the Blackwood family is a testament to his incredible generosity. The insult was exquisitely crafted. She called my father a peasant, labeled my career as mediocre, and framed my marriage as a rescue mission. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted the wealthy investors in the room to view me as a lucky gold digger who owed everything to her brilliant son. I let the final echo of Beatrice's condescending laughter fade into the heavy silence of the dining room before I made my move. I gently withdrew my hand from under Nate's, picked up my own crystal flute, and stood. The chair scraped softly against the carpet. I smoothed the skirt of my ivory gown, ensuring my posture was straight. I looked directly at Beatrice, then swept my gaze across the sea of expectant, wealthy faces. I let a warm, radiant smile stretch across my face. "Thank you, Beatrice." I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "Your words mean more than you know. It is true I come from a very different world. My father taught me that a ledger never lies, that every debt must eventually be paid, and that true wealth is built on absolute transparency. He was a simple man, but he understood the foundation of structural integrity." I turned slightly to look down at Nate. His handsome face was frozen in a mask of polite affection. And Nathaniel is indeed a remarkable man. He recognized the pristine value of what my father built. I raised my glass slightly higher, addressing the investors at the surrounding tables. Nate has shown me the inner workings of high finance. He has shown me exactly how this tier of wealth operates behind closed doors. You all place so much trust in him. You hand over your hard-earned millions believing he will secure your futures. And I promise you, by the time this wedding weekend is over, everyone in this room is going to get exactly what they deserve. We are going to merge our assets, consolidate our liabilities, and bring everything completely out into the open. Here is to a future of total accountability. Naomi caught my eye. She casually raised her water glass to her lips to hide a razor-sharp smirk. Lucas sat back in his chair, looking immensely proud. They were the only two people in the room who understood that my toast was not a vow of bridal devotion. It was a declaration of war. I had just promised a room full of soon-to-be defrauded investors that I was going to expose the Ponzi scheme. Beatrice's smile looked somewhat brittle as she sat down, perhaps sensing a shift in the current, but unable to pinpoint the exact threat in my polite professional vocabulary. Nate stood up quickly, wrapping his arm around my waist once more. He chuckled a smooth, practiced sound and kissed my cheek. "What a beautiful sentiment, my love," he said loudly for the room to hear. "To total accountability." He raised his glass, and the guests echoed the toast, drinking to their own impending financial ruin. As the waitstaff began clearing the salad plates, Nate leaned down to my ear. "You always know exactly what to say to make them comfortable," he whispered. "Come with me. There are some very important people who have been dying to meet the woman who finally tied me down." He guided me away from the head table and steered me toward the far corner of the room, where the most heavily invested clients had clustered. These were the whales. The men and women whose massive capital injections were currently keeping Nate's sinking ship barely afloat. I recognized a few faces from financial magazines. There was a real estate tycoon from Boston, an aging tech billionaire, and a retired pharmaceutical executive. Nate approached them with the easy, predatory confidence of a seasoned con artist. "Gentlemen," Nate announced, slipping into his most charismatic persona, "I want to introduce you to the woman of the hour, my future wife, Clara." The tech billionaire, an older man named Harrison, reached out and shook my hand firmly. "It is a pleasure, Clara. Nate has told us quite a bit about you. He says you are a forensic accountant. We need more people with your specific skill set in this industry to keep the rest of us honest." I smiled warmly, looking him dead in the eye. "You would be surprised how often people forget to look at the raw data, Harrison. But numbers are incredibly stubborn things. They always tell the truth eventually, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury them." Harrison laughed heartily, slapping Nate on the shoulder. "She is sharp, Nate. You better make sure your own books are balanced before Saturday." Nate forced a laugh, though I felt his grip on my waist tighten fractionally. "My books are completely transparent," he lied flawlessly. "Clara has already audited my heart." I spent the next 20 minutes moving from investor to investor. I played the role of the adoring partner, but underneath the bridal facade, I was conducting a stealth interrogation. I asked polite, seemingly innocent questions about how long they had known Nate and which specific funds they had bought into. I was mentally cataloging their names, their companies, and their respective exposure to Nate's fraud. I needed to know exactly who was in the room so I could match their profiles against the encrypted data I was about to steal from his hard drive. Every time one of them praised Nate's financial genius, my resolve hardened. They were arrogant, yes, but they did not deserve to have their entire life savings funneled into an offshore account for Rachel and her twins. They certainly did not deserve to be part of a scheme that would end with me in a federal prison uniform. As the main course was being served, the noise level in the room peaked. Waiters were bustling between the tables with heavy silver trays. Nate was locked into a deep, animated conversation with Harrison about upcoming quarterly projections. Beatrice was at the opposite end of the room, loudly complaining to the event coordinator about the temperature of the soup. The distraction level was absolutely perfect. It was time for me to execute the next phase of the operation. I reached for my water goblet, but my hand deliberately brushed against a full glass of red wine, sitting dangerously close to the edge of the table. The heavy crystal tipped over, splashing a dark crimson stain across the pristine ivory silk of my designer gown. I gasped loud enough to cut through the surrounding chatter and immediately grabbed Nate's attention. He snapped his head around, his charming smile faltering for a fraction of a second when he saw the mess I had just created. I acted panicked, playing the hysterical bride to absolute perfection. "Nate, look what I just did!" I cried out, grabbing a white linen napkin and dabbing frantically at the spreading red stain. "The silk is going to completely ruin if I do not treat this immediately." He sighed, a micro-expression of deep annoyance flashing across his eyes before he quickly masked it for the watching investors. "Go upstairs to the suite and use the club soda from the minibar," he instructed, his voice tight. He pulled the sleek black hotel keycard from his tuxedo pocket and pressed it firmly into my palm. "Make it quick, Clara. Harrison wants to discuss the upcoming merger over dessert." I nodded frantically, clutching the stained fabric of my dress, and hurried away from the head table. As I moved swiftly toward the grand double doors of the dining room, I caught Naomi's eye. She was sipping her sparkling water, completely composed, but she gave me a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The plan was officially in motion. Lucas was already casually repositioning himself near the hallway entrance, acting as a human tripwire just in case Nate decided to follow me upstairs. He leaned against the wall, perfectly blocking the primary exit path. The heavy wooden doors of the dining room closed behind me, instantly cutting off the roar of the party. The silence of the private corridor was immediate and absolute. I dropped the frantic bride act the second I was out of sight. I walked swiftly to the brass-plated elevator, swiped Nate's black keycard, and pressed the button for the penthouse level. The elevator ascended with a smooth, silent glide. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored doors. I looked like a woman dealing with a ruined dress, but my heart was beating with the steady, measured rhythm of a metronome. I was entering enemy territory. The doors slid open to the top floor. Thick velvet carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I approached the penthouse suite at the end of the long hallway. I swiped the keycard. The lock clicked green and I pushed the door open. The suite was a cavernous expanse of dark mahogany wood vintage leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. It smelled faintly of Nate's expensive cologne, a scent that now made my stomach turn. I stepped inside, quietly closed the door behind me, and engaged the heavy brass deadbolt. There was absolutely no time to waste. I moved past the king-sized bed and headed straight for the private study attached to the master suite. There, sitting perfectly centered on a massive glass desk, was Nate's biometric briefcase. It was a heavy military-grade aluminum case designed to protect highly sensitive corporate data. To anyone else, it would be an impenetrable fortress. To a forensic accountant who had spent the last 2 years quietly observing her mark, it was just another puzzle waiting to be solved. I knew that brute force would trigger an internal lockdown protocol, wiping the drive clean in seconds. Nate was arrogant, and arrogance breeds predictable security flaws. He relied heavily on the fingerprint scanner on the handle, assuming his biometric data was foolproof. But biometric locks always have a manual numerical override for emergencies or technical failures. I had watched him use it exactly once 6 months ago, when we were caught in a sudden downpour, and his wet fingers could not register on the scanner. I had been standing behind him, seemingly distracted by shaking out my umbrella, but my trained eyes had precisely tracked the rapid movement of his thumb across the digital keypad. He had typed a 6-digit code. It was not his birthday, nor mine, nor the anniversary of his venture capital fund. It was the exact date of his mother's birth entered in reverse, a pathetic homage to the woman orchestrating my downfall. I reached the desk and placed my hands on the cold aluminum of the briefcase. I took a steadying breath, pressing the wake button on the digital keypad, the small screen illuminated with a harsh blue glow. I carefully typed the 6 numbers, pressing each key with deliberate clinical precision. The screen flashed green. A mechanized whir echoed from inside the casing, followed by a sharp metallic click. The latches sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on a bed of custom-cut foam, was the encrypted solid-state drive. It was roughly the size of a deck of cards, sleek and black, containing the financial ruin of every investor sitting in the dining room below. It held the absolute truth about the missing $4 million, the offshore proxy accounts in the Cayman Islands, and the hidden family he was actively supporting with stolen venture capital money. I pulled the drive from the protective foam. From a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of my gown, I extracted a specialized decryption cable and a secondary high-capacity flash drive that Naomi and I had programmed the night before. I connected the drives, establishing a secure, localized bridge that would bypass his basic firewall. I tapped the execution command on the miniature interface. A green progress bar appeared on the small screen of my device, glowing brightly in the dim study. The data transfer had started, and the countdown to his destruction was officially underway. The progress bar crawled forward with agonizing slowness. 10%, 20%. I stood perfectly still in the dim lighting of the study, my eyes locked on the glowing green line. The data pouring into my secure drive was massive. Nate had not just kept a few spreadsheets, he had archived his entire criminal history. I watched the file names flash rapidly across the miniature interface as they duplicated. There were complex escrow ledgers, falsified balance sheets, and thousands of wire transfer receipts. There were also deeply personal files. I caught glimpses of folders labeled with offshore routing numbers and property deeds located in tropical tax havens. It was a digital map of his secret life, neatly organized and completely damning. 35%. My heart hammered against my ribs, keeping pace with the rapid flicker of the data transfer. I glanced at the heavy brass clock sitting on the edge of the mahogany desk. I had been gone for exactly 7 minutes. Nate would be expecting me back downstairs soon. Harrison and the other investors would be finishing their main courses, eager to discuss their fraudulent quarterly returns over dessert. I needed to move faster, but I was entirely at the mercy of the encryption algorithm fighting against Naomi's bypass code. 50%, 70%. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I imagined Nate standing in the Belvedere Club dining room laughing at his own jokes, playing the role of the devoted future husband. He thought I was standing in front of a mirror crying over a stained silk gown. He thought his trap was perfectly set. He had no idea I was systematically dismantling his entire reality bite by bite. 85%. The progress bar surged forward, and a wave of fierce, triumphant energy washed over me. I was going to hand this drive to the federal authorities, and I was going to watch his empire crumble into dust. 95%. The finish line was incredibly close. Then the green line abruptly halted. 99%. It just froze. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles ached. A massive compressed file was attempting to bridge the gap. The interface flashed a warning about a secondary encryption protocol protecting a folder labeled Cayman Holdings. This was the Holy Grail. This was the undeniable proof of the shell company he planned to legitimize using my father's LLC. I silently urged the device to push through the firewall. The seconds dragged on like hours. Suddenly, a sharp electronic beep echoed through the penthouse suite. It was not coming from my device. It was coming from the main door. Someone had just swiped a keycard. My blood turned to ice. I froze my eyes, darting toward the study door. I listened intently as the heavy main door swung open, followed by the distinct squeak of a rolling utility cart. It was not Nate. It was the hotel cleaning staff arriving for the evening turndown service. I heard a woman humming a soft tune as she moved into the living area, adjusting pillows and emptying trash bins. I was trapped. The study was directly connected to the master bedroom, which was her next inevitable stop. If she walked in and saw me hovering over the groom's open biometric briefcase with a hacking device attached, my cover would be entirely blown. Hotel staff were trained to report suspicious activity, especially in VIP suites. I looked back at the screen. Still 99%. The decrypting file was massive. I heard the cleaning cart roll across the hardwood floor, moving closer to the bedroom door. The humming grew louder. I calculated the distance between the desk and the master bathroom. I needed to hide, but pulling the drive now would corrupt the entire payload. I would lose the Cayman Islands evidence. I stood my ground. I watched the door handle to the master bedroom begin to turn. Just as the brass knob clicked, my small interface screen flashed a brilliant emerald green. Transfer complete. I moved with the speed of a seasoned operative. I yanked the decryption cable from the hard drive, shoved it into the hidden pocket of my gown, and dropped the black drive back into its custom foam bed. I slammed the heavy aluminum lid shut. The mechanized latches snapped into place, automatically locking and rearming the biometric security protocol. I wiped the handle with the edge of my silk sleeve to remove any lingering fingerprints. I grabbed my water goblet and a bottle of club soda from the desk tray, spinning around just as the cleaning woman stepped into the study. She gasped clearly, startled to find someone standing in the dark. I immediately dropped into my frantic bride persona. I held up the stained silk of my dress, looking at her with wide, desperate eyes. "I am so sorry to startle you," I said, keeping my voice breathless and highly agitated. I spilled red wine all over my wedding gown at the rehearsal dinner downstairs. I ran up here to use the club soda, but I think I am making it worse. The woman instantly relaxed her expression, melting into pure sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, setting down her stack of fresh towels. "Let me help you with that. Cold water and a little salt work much better than club soda. You just sit down in the bathroom and I will fetch some ice." I thanked her profusely, allowing her to fuss over the stain while I stood under the bright bathroom lights. My heart was still racing, but the panic had completely evaporated. Hidden safely against my ribs, tucked inside the lining of the ruined dress, was the digital key to Nate's federal indictment. After a few minutes of theatrical dabbing and expressing my profound gratitude, I excused myself, claiming my fiancé was waiting for me. I walked out of the penthouse suite and stepped back into the elevator. As the doors closed, sealing me inside the mirrored box, I finally let out a long, trembling exhale. I rested my hand over the hidden pocket. The small flash drive felt heavy, dense with the weight of stolen millions and shattered lies. I smoothed my hair, fixed my posture, and watched the floor numbers descend toward the dining room. I had successfully infiltrated the viper's nest and extracted the venom. Now it was time to go back downstairs, eat dessert with the sharks, and prepare for the ultimate slaughter. Now it was time to go back downstairs, eat dessert with the sharks, and prepare for the ultimate slaughter. I survived the remainder of the rehearsal dinner with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent her entire professional life keeping her emotions completely detached from her face. I smiled at the investors, ate my dessert, and let Nate wrap his arm around my waist while he finalized his fraudulent business pitches. When the evening finally wrapped up, I kissed his cheek and told him it was bad luck to spend the night together so close to the wedding. He eagerly agreed, probably profoundly relieved, to finally drop the devoted act and get back to his encrypted briefcase. He hailed me a cab, totally unaware that the small flash drive pressing against my ribs contained the explosive end to his entire world. I did not go to my townhouse. I gave the driver the address for the back alley of the brownstone. Lucas was waiting by the door when I arrived, his face tense with anticipation. He ushered me inside the kitchen where Naomi was already sitting at the dining table. She had replaced the yellow legal pads with two high-performance laptops and a complex array of decryption software. I reached into my dress, pulled out the sleek black flash drive, and placed it on the hard wooden surface. Naomi did not waste a single second. She plugged the drive into an isolated offline terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard with precision. The screen filled with lines of scrolling code as her software stripped away the remaining fragments of Nate's security protocols. For a long moment, the room was perfectly silent, save for the hum of the computer processor and the steady drum of rain against the window panes. "We are in," Naomi announced, her voice razor sharp. The screen cleared, revealing a neatly organized grid of folders. It was a comprehensive digital map of a sprawling financial underworld. There were folders labeled with offshore routing numbers, internal escrow balances, and corporate entities. But my eyes bypassed the complex financial jargon and locked immediately onto a single file folder isolated at the very bottom of the screen. It was simply labeled Rachel. My heart slammed against my chest. This was the name I had heard echoing in the foyer of Beatrice's mansion. The woman who was receiving the hush money. The woman waiting in the shadows while I was being led to the slaughter. "Open it," I commanded, stepping closer to the monitor. Naomi clicked the icon. The folder expanded, flooding the screen with hundreds of high-resolution files. I braced myself for dense financial documents, perhaps a wire transfer receipt or a commercial real estate lease. Instead, the screen filled with photographs. I stopped breathing. Lucas let out a sharp, disgusted breath behind me. The images were a meticulously documented timeline of a completely separate existence. There was Nate looking relaxed and genuinely happy, standing on the deck of a massive beachfront home. He had his arms wrapped around a stunning brunette woman, Rachel. In the next photo, they were sitting together on a hospital bed, each holding a newborn baby. The timestamp on the image was from exactly 5 years ago. 5 years. He had been living this massive lie long before he ever walked into that charity gala and handed me a cup of coffee. Naomi silently opened the subfolders, pulling up the scanned PDF documents buried beneath the pictures. She brought up 2 birth certificates, a boy and a girl, twins. Nathaniel was listed clearly on the official documents as the biological father. I stared at his signature on the bottom line. It was the same bold, arrogant scrawl he used when he signed the dinner checks. It was the exact same signature he used to endorse the fraudulent prenuptial agreement designed to ruin my life. "Scroll down," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow and metallic to my own ears. Naomi clicked the next file. It was a massive property deed. It detailed the purchase of a $3 million estate located in an exclusive gated community in the Cayman Islands. The property was legally registered under a shell company, but the primary resident listed on the utility bills and property tax documents was Rachel. Let me see the funding source for the house. I instructed, my forensic accounting instincts kicking into high gear despite the surreal nature of the devastating discovery. Naomi opened the attached financial ledger. I traced the routing numbers with my finger against the glass screen. The money used to buy the Cayman estate had been pulled directly from the venture capital fund's primary escrow account. It was the exact account the Securities and Exchange Commission was currently investigating. He had not just bought a luxury house. He had blatantly drained his investors' capital to purchase a tropical fortress for his secret family, and he was planning to use my father's hard-earned legacy to balance the stolen books. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He had spent the last 2 years holding my hand, comforting me over the deep loss of my father, and planning a lavish, sophisticated wedding, all while his actual family waited for him to finish his elaborate con. He had compartmentalized his life with the chilling efficiency of a true sociopath. He viewed me as nothing more than a disposable asset, a human shield specifically chosen to absorb the devastating impact of his financial crimes. Look at this, Naomi said, pulling up a series of recent email transcripts between Nate and Rachel. They were sent through a heavily encrypted server, but the backup drive had saved cached digital copies. I leaned in to read the text. Rachel had been getting incredibly impatient. She was constantly complaining about being hidden away, demanding to know when Nate was finally going to join them permanently. Nate's response, sent just 3 days ago, made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. Be patient, my love. The idiot is signing the papers on Saturday. Once the ink dries, her company absorbs the massive deficit. The federal auditors will lock onto her accounts by next week. I will file the divorce papers, claim she was embezzling the funds, and be on a private plane to you by Tuesday. The twins will have their father back full-time. Just pack the bags and wait for my signal. The idiot. That was his genuine name for me. Lucas slammed his hand down on the heavy wooden table, rattling the coffee mugs. I am calling the police right now. This is criminal fraud. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. I reached out and gently closed the laptop screen, plunging the dining room back into shadows. Calling the police right now is entirely too easy. It gives him time to hire his elite lawyers and fight the charges. He wants to play dangerous games with federal felonies and fake weddings. I am going to give him exactly the wedding he planned, but the outcome will be entirely mine. We have all the data we need. Now we build the inescapable trap. I pulled my laptop closer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The emotional paralysis was completely gone, replaced by the clinical precision that had defined my entire career. I opened a new blank spreadsheet. It was the digital canvas where I would paint the masterpiece of Nate's destruction. I instructed Naomi to export the raw transaction logs from the decrypted drive into my secure auditing software. As the massive datasets flooded my screen, the numbers began to tell a story that was far more sinister than a simple affair. This was a masterclass in financial deception, but Nate had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the woman he planned to frame. I started with the primary escrow accounts at Blackwood Capital. Nate had assured his investors, including the wealthy men I had just shared dessert with, that their capital was safely parked in high-yield growth funds. I cross-referenced the official investor statements against the raw internal ledgers we had just stolen. The discrepancy was immediate and glaring. Nate was running a classic diversionary tactic. He would take a massive deposit from a new client like the tech billionaire Harrison and immediately slice it into dozens of smaller, seemingly innocuous transactions. He masked these withdrawals as consulting fees, legal retainers, and market research expenditures. To an untrained eye, or a lazy internal auditor, these outward flows looked like the normal operating costs of a thriving venture capital firm. But I was not a lazy auditor. I isolated a specific block of capital, exactly $4 million, which had vanished over the course of 8 months. I highlighted the routing numbers associated with the outbound wire transfers. The money did not disappear into thin air. It traveled. I tracked the first wave of stolen capital as it left the New York escrow accounts and landed in a series of domestic limited liability companies registered in Delaware. Delaware is a notorious safe haven for corporate secrecy, offering strict privacy laws that shield the identities of business owners. Nate had set up at least 7 different dummy corporations with vague names like Apex Strategic Solutions and Horizon Consulting Partners. The stolen money bounced rapidly between these domestic accounts, performing a digital shell game designed to wash the funds clean and obscure their original source. Lucas brought me a fresh cup of coffee, his eyes wide as he watched the web of fraudulent transactions expand across my monitors. He asked how a single person could manage such a complex web of deceit without tripping an alarm. I explained that Nate was not operating a business. He was operating a highly sophisticated financial centrifuge. By constantly spinning the capital through different domestic accounts, he created a chaotic blur of financial noise. But noise always has a pattern if you know exactly how to listen. I applied a specific forensic algorithm to the Delaware transactions, tracing the outflow of the washed funds. The money eventually funneled into a single concentrated stream. It left the United States entirely, crossing international borders through a series of staggered wire transfers. The destination was a notorious banking institution located in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands are the global epicenter of offshore wealth concealment. I pulled up the corresponding files from Naomi's decryption efforts, matching the dates and amounts of the international wire transfers to the documents stored in Nate's hidden folders. I found the exact point of impact. The stolen $4 million had been deposited into the accounts of an offshore shell company officially registered as Oceanic Ventures Limited. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the incorporation documents for Oceanic Ventures. Offshore companies are designed to hide the true beneficiaries, utilizing local nominee directors to mask the actual owners. But Nate had needed to ensure his secret family had unrestricted access to the stolen capital. He could not rely entirely on foreign proxies. He had to leave a permanent authorized signatory on the accounts. I opened the banking mandates attached to Oceanic Ventures Limited. They're listed as the primary authorized beneficiary with full uninhibited access to the offshore funds was a very familiar name, Rachel. My chest tightened, not with grief, but with a fierce predatory thrill. I had found the smoking gun. Nate had systematically drained $4 million from his trusting investors, washed the capital through Delaware dummy corporations, and parked the stolen wealth in a Cayman Islands shell company controlled entirely by his mistress. But the money had not just sat idle in offshore accounts. I cross-referenced the property deed Naomi had uncovered earlier. The $3 million beachfront estate, the sprawling mansion where Nate had posed for photos holding his secret twin children, was fully owned by Oceanic Ventures Limited. The transaction dates aligned perfectly. Nate had used the stolen venture capital funds to buy the luxury property outright in cash. He had effectively used his investors' life savings to purchase a tropical fortress for his second family. I did not stop there. I dug deeper into the offshore ledgers, uncovering a sickening trail of ongoing embezzlement. Nate was using the stolen capital to fund every aspect of his secret life. There were massive recurring payments for private offshore academies for the twins, exorbitant monthly stipends for Rachel, and receipts for luxury vehicles registered on the island. He was living like a king on stolen money, all while meticulously plotting to hand me the bill and a pair of federal handcuffs. Naomi stood beside me. Her arms crossed, her legal mind processing the sheer volume of evidence I was compiling into a master dossier. She noted that this was no longer a simple case of white-collar crime. This was a sprawling multinational conspiracy that would trigger a massive coordinated response from multiple federal agencies. The Securities and Exchange Commission would dismantle the fund, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation would handle the wire fraud, the money laundering, and the offshore embezzlement. I spent the next 2 hours organizing the evidence. I linked every fraudulent invoice, every Delaware wire transfer, and every Cayman Island deposit directly back to Nate's personal digital signature. I created a pristine, undeniable paper trail that connected the stolen $4 million directly to the mansion and to Rachel. I built a financial timeline so rigid and structurally sound that not even the most expensive defense attorneys on the Eastern Seaboard would be able to tear it down. By the time I finished compiling the final master spreadsheet, the heavy rain had stopped. A pale gray dawn was beginning to break over the city, casting a cold light through the windows of the brownstone. My eyes ached and my body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than a surgical blade. I saved the master dossier to a secure encrypted drive. The trap was fully constructed, baited, and ready to spring. Now all I had to do was walk down the aisle and hand the federal government the match to burn Nate's entire world to ashes. Now all I had to do was walk down the aisle and hand the federal government the match to burn Nate's entire world to ashes. Friday morning arrived with a blinding glare, the storm having finally broken over the city. I had not slept a single minute, but the adrenaline surging through my veins rendered fatigue entirely irrelevant. I left Naomi and Lucas at the brownstone, armed with the encrypted drive and a flawless game plan. I drove back to my townhouse to shower change into a sharp, understated business suit and prepare for the most critical financial maneuvers of my life. Nate thought the trap was set for Saturday. He did not know that by Friday afternoon, the bait he was relying on would completely vanish. My first objective was my personal liquid assets. I sat at my home office desk at precisely 8 o'clock in the morning and began making calls to my primary financial institutions. I did not use the automated online systems. I needed airtight verbal confirmation with specialized fraud departments. I dialed the private banking line for my primary account and informed the representative that I had reason to believe my identity and financial credentials had been compromised in a highly sophisticated corporate data breach. I requested an immediate hard freeze on all my checking, savings, and investment portfolios. I instructed them to flag any transfer requests regardless of the authorized signatures provided and to reject all incoming and outgoing wire attempts until further notice. I repeated this meticulous process across 3 different banks. I locked down my credit lines, placed severe fraud alerts with all major credit bureaus, and severed any digital linkages between my personal accounts and the shared wedding expense accounts Nate had insisted we open. He had repeatedly urged me to keep substantial funds in those joint accounts for last-minute vendor payments. I drained my contributions down to the last penny, transferring the capital into a newly established unlinked account, hidden behind a secondary firewall. By 9:30, my personal wealth was effectively encased in digital concrete. If Nate tried to siphon even a single dollar to cover his massive deficit, he would hit a solid brick wall. But my personal cash was just a fraction of the prize Nate was truly after. His entire survival strategy hinged on absorbing my late father's commercial real estate company. The prenuptial agreement specifically targeted any limited liability companies managed entirely, or in part, by me. I needed to remove myself from that equation before the wedding bells rang. At 10 o'clock, I walked into the downtown offices of Arthur Pendleton. He was an old-school estate lawyer who had been my father's most trusted advisor for 30 years. He knew the blood, sweat, and tears my dad had poured into those commercial properties. Lucas was already sitting in the leather armchair opposite Arthur's desk, holding a stack of pristine legal documents Naomi had rushed to draft the previous night. Arthur looked over his reading glasses as I took the seat next to my brother. He had reviewed the urgent transfer request we sent at dawn. He asked me if I fully understood the gravity of what I was doing. Relinquishing all legal rights, managerial control, and beneficial interest in the family company was an irrevocable action. Once the papers were filed, I would have absolutely zero legal standing within the business my father built. I looked at the documents. I thought about my father, a man who worked with calloused hands and unwavering integrity. He had built that company to protect his children, not to serve as a sacrificial buffer for a Manhattan con artist. I picked up the heavy brass pen from Arthur's desk. I told Arthur that I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I signed my name across the dotted lines, executing a complete and total transfer of ownership. I surrendered every share, every voting right, and every managerial title directly to Lucas. Naomi had structured the transfer brilliantly. It was not a sale that could be contested later. It was a direct, legally binding divestment. As of Friday morning, the LLC was solely and exclusively owned by my brother. I was officially a civilian with zero corporate assets attached to my name. Lucas watched as Arthur applied his heavy notary stamp to the final page. My brother reached out and squeezed my shoulder. The silent promise between us was clear. He would safeguard our father's legacy, keeping it completely out of Nate's predatory reach. When the ink dried, the trap Nate had designed to destroy me was officially rendered useless. The clause in the prenuptial agreement regarding my corporate liabilities was now pointing at absolute nothingness. He was planning to absorb an entity that I no longer owned. I left Arthur's office and stepped out into the crisp morning air. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from Beatrice reminding me about her highly anticipated bridal luncheon that afternoon. She demanded I arrive early to review the floral arrangements for the church, adding a passive-aggressive note about hoping I looked rested for the photographer. I typed back a cheerful, compliant response, assuring her I was on my way and eager to finalize the perfect details for the big day. Playing the role of the submissive, oblivious bride required every ounce of self-control I possessed, but the knowledge I carried made the performance incredibly satisfying. Beatrice and Nate were spending their Friday finalizing the aesthetics of a wedding that was nothing more than a financial illusion. They were arranging flowers on the deck of a sinking ship. Meanwhile, I had just secured the lifeboats. I walked down the busy sidewalk feeling an overwhelming sense of liberation. My father's legacy was safe. My personal finances were locked in a vault. I was completely unburdened, stripped of the very assets that made me a target. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address for Naomi's office building. Securing the assets was only the defensive half of the battle. Now it was time to switch to the offense. We had raw data wire transfer receipts and the offshore proxy documents. It was time to compile the ultimate dossier and make sure the federal agents had everything they needed to tear Blackwood Capital apart. I walked into the towering glass and steel structure that housed Naomi's corporate law firm. The lobby was a massive expanse of polished marble and severe geometric security gates. It was exactly the kind of impenetrable fortress we needed to launch a federal strike. Bypassing the main reception desk, I used the temporary security badge Naomi had texted me, taking the express elevator straight to the 42nd floor. Naomi was waiting for me in a windowless interior conference room, affectionately known by her colleagues as the War Room. It was an isolation chamber designed for handling highly classified corporate mergers. It was equipped with secure local servers completely severed from the firm's primary network. No unauthorized digital traffic could enter or leave this space without triggering massive security protocols. It was the perfect environment to handle the radioactive data we had stolen from Nate. I set my encrypted drive on the massive mahogany table next to Naomi's dual-monitor workstation. I told her the family business was officially out of my name and locked safely in Lucas's control. She gave a sharp nod of approval, plugged in the drive, and we immediately went to work. Our objective was singular and ruthless. We had to build a dossier so comprehensive and legally devastating that federal investigators would have absolutely no choice but to raid Blackwood Capital before Monday morning. Government agencies are notoriously slow. They are buried under mountains of paperwork and bureaucratic red tape. If we simply sent an anonymous email claiming Nate was running a Ponzi scheme, it might sit in an unread inbox for 6 months. By then, he and Rachel would be sipping cocktails in the Cayman Islands, while I sat in a federal holding cell. We needed to hand the Securities and Exchange Commission a fully completed investigation on a silver platter. I opened my forensic auditing software and projected my master spreadsheet onto the large presentation screen on the wall. I walked Naomi through the exact financial anatomy of the fraud. I showed her the initial capital injections from the wealthy investors I had met at the rehearsal dinner. I highlighted the precise moments those funds were chopped into microtransactions and masked as consulting fees. Then I traced the money through the 7 Delaware dummy corporations, mapping the chaotic digital shell game Nate had used to wash the stolen capital clean. Finally, I displayed the undeniable offshore wire transfers that deposited $4 million directly into the Oceanic Ventures account controlled by his secret mistress. Naomi analyzed the data with the terrifying efficiency of a top-tier corporate litigator. She did not just see stolen money. She saw specific, undeniable violations of federal law. She began drafting the legal framework for our anonymous tip. She categorized the Delaware transactions under multiple counts of felony wire fraud and money laundering. She flagged the falsified escrow ledgers as severe violations of the Securities Exchange Act. She even identified several distinct instances of tax evasion related to the Cayman Island property purchases. We spent the next 4 hours merging my forensic financial roadmap with her airtight legal statutes. Every single claim we made in the dossier was immediately backed up by raw, irrefutable data pulled directly from Nate's biometric briefcase. We included copies of the fabricated investor portfolios, the offshore banking mandates bearing Rachel's signature, and the encrypted email transcripts detailing his explicit plan to flee the country and frame me for the collapse. We essentially gift-wrapped Nate's entire criminal operation and tied it with a bow made of federal indictments. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the dossier was complete. It was a masterpiece of financial and legal destruction spanning over 200 pages of hyperlinked evidence. To anyone at the FBI or the SEC, this document would read like the holy grail of white-collar crime prosecution. There were no loose ends, no ambiguous transactions, and no room for reasonable doubt. The final step was the delivery. We could not risk the submission being traced back to either of us. If Nate discovered we were the whistleblowers before the trap snapped shut, he would immediately destroy his servers and run. Naomi pulled a clean, unregistered laptop from a locked cabinet. She booted it using a specialized encrypted operating system that routed our internet connection through multiple international proxy servers, effectively masking our digital footprint. We navigated to the official whistleblower portal for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The portal was designed specifically for high-level financial informants. We uploaded the massive encrypted dossier, filling out the required anonymous tip forms with clinical precision. We highlighted the imminent flight risk, pointing out the email where Nate explicitly stated his intention to flee the country by Tuesday. We emphasized the urgent threat to the current investors, noting that millions of dollars were actively being drained to fund the offshore accounts. Naomi then pulled up the secure tip line for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's white-collar crime division. We submitted a duplicate copy of the entire dossier, ensuring that 2 separate federal agencies would simultaneously receive the explosive intelligence. Jurisdictional competition between federal branches almost always guarantees a rapid, aggressive response. I stared at the submit button on the screen. The past 2 years of my life flashed through my mind. I saw Nate comforting me at my father's funeral, handing me a cup of coffee with a sympathetic smile. I saw him presenting the 80-page prenuptial agreement, swearing it was designed to protect my assets. I saw him standing in the Belvedere Club toasting to total accountability while actively stealing millions from the men clapping him on the back. My finger hovered over the mouse pad. There was no hesitation, no lingering doubt, and absolutely no mercy left in my heart. I pressed down, hearing the sharp, definitive click of the mouse. The screen refreshed, confirming transmission. The trap was set. My phone buzzed in my purse. Nate was calling me now. My phone buzzed in my purse. Nate was calling me now. I pulled the vibrating device from my leather bag, staring at his contact photo. It was a picture we took in Central Park last autumn. He was kissing my cheek, his eyes crinkling with that manufactured warmth. I looked across the mahogany conference table at Naomi. She raised a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow, silently challenging me to execute the next phase of our operation. I cleared my throat, forcing my vocal cords to abandon the cold, clinical tone of a forensic accountant. I needed to sound soft, distracted, and utterly absorbed in the trivialities of wedding planning. I swiped the green answer button and brought the phone to my ear. Hi, honey, I answered, letting a breathless, happy sigh color my words. I am just running between appointments. Is everything okay? Clara! His voice was incredibly tight, strained by a current of panic he was desperately trying to suppress. It lacked the smooth, buttered confidence he had wielded so effortlessly at the rehearsal dinner. Hey, baby. Yes, everything is fine. Just a minor administrative hiccup on my end. I am sitting with my accounting team right now, and we are seeing some strange activity on the joint wedding accounts. Did you move any capital this morning? I smiled. It was a terrifying, genuine smile. The financial tripwires I had established at dawn were already functioning exactly as designed. When I drained the joint accounts and instituted the hard freeze on my personal assets, it had triggered an automated alert on his end. He was actively attempting to siphon cash, realizing his primary venture capital lines were likely already experiencing liquidity issues from the early ripples of federal scrutiny. Moved capital. I repeated, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound delightfully confused. Nate, you know I am terrible with the banking portals. I tried to pay the florist the final installment this morning, but the app kept giving me an error code. I think I might have locked myself out by entering the wrong password too many times. You know how clumsy I get when I am stressed. I heard a sharp intake of breath on his end of the line. He was physically struggling to maintain his temper. He needed my liquid assets to bridge the massive gaps in his fraudulent ledgers. Clara, you locked the accounts? Nate asked, his tone dropping its affectionate facade for a fraction of a second. The florist was supposed to be paid from the secondary reserve. I am looking at your primary checking and savings links right now, and they are showing a complete restriction code. Did you call the bank fraud department? Oh my gosh, yes! I let out a dramatic, exasperated groan, leaning back in my chair, while Naomi covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. The bank called me right after I messed up the login. They said there was suspicious activity because of all the large wedding vendor payments I have been trying to make. They put a temporary security freeze on absolutely everything under my social security number. It is so frustrating. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his sociopathic mind. His safety net was abruptly encased in digital concrete just hours before he planned to execute his final maneuver. Okay, Nate said, forcing a slow, measured exhale. Okay, baby, do not panic. This is an easy fix. I need you to go down to the local branch right now, speak to a manager in person, verify your identity, and have them lift the restriction immediately. I need to transfer some funds to cover a short-term margin call, and I was planning to use your liquid assets as a temporary bridge until Monday. It is urgent, Clara. I injected a tone of pure distress into my response, playing the overwhelmed bride being pushed past her breaking point. Nate, I cannot go to the bank right now. I am literally standing on the sidewalk outside the country club. Your mother's bridal luncheon starts in 10 minutes. She explicitly told me I could not be a single minute late because the photographer is already setting up for the foundation portraits. If I leave now to sit in a bank lobby, she will be absolutely furious with me. I invoked Beatrice intentionally. I knew Nate was terrified of his mother. He knew how highly she valued social appearances, and he knew that disrupting her meticulously planned event would raise immediate questions he could not afford to answer. I was trapping him between his financial desperation and his mother's ironclad social calendar. Clara, this is business. Nate growled, the mask slipping further. The luncheon can wait. I need you to unlock those accounts. I let my voice wobble, injecting a hint of genuine-sounding tears. Are you mad at me? I am so sorry, Nate. I just wanted everything to be perfect for Saturday. The bank manager told me over the phone that lifting a hard fraud freeze requires 24 hours to process anyway. Even if I went right now, the funds would not be available until Monday morning. Cannot your venture fund cover the margin call until then? You always tell me how successful the firm is. I completely trust you to handle it, honey. You are the financial genius, not me. I fed his ego a massive, poisoned compliment. I reminded him of his own lies, forcing him to swallow the bitter pill of his fabricated persona. If he admitted the fund could not cover a basic margin call, he would be admitting failure. If he pushed me any harder, he would risk exposing the desperation of a man on the brink of federal indictment. Another long, agonizing silence stretched across the digital connection. He was cornered, and he knew it. He had no viable moves left to play. "You are right," Nate finally said, his voice sounding hollow and completely defeated. "You are right, baby. It is my job to handle the finances. You just focus on the luncheon. Enjoy your time with my mother. I will sort out the margin call on my end. I will see you tonight." "Thank you so much, honey," I chirped brightly, twisting the knife one last time. "You are the best. I cannot wait to marry you." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the mahogany conference table. The room was perfectly quiet. I looked at Naomi. She was staring at me with profound professional respect. We had successfully blocked his final attempt to steal my cash, and we had done it without raising a single red flag about our true intentions. Nate fully believed he was dealing with a clumsy emotional bride who had accidentally tripped a bank security wire. He had absolutely no idea that the alert he saw on his screen was just the very first tremor of the massive federal earthquake we had just unleashed. "He is completely trapped," Naomi said, closing her encrypted laptop with a definitive snap. "He cannot access your money, he cannot utilize the LLC, and the federal dossier is currently sitting in the priority queue at the Securities and Exchange Commission." I stood up from the conference table, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored business suit. The defensive measures were executed perfectly, and the offensive strike was delivered. But the psychological warfare was not quite over. As I gathered my belongings, my phone buzzed again with a calendar notification. It was time for Beatrice's bridal luncheon. I had just outsmarted the sun, and now it was time to go smile directly into the face of the mother who had conspired to send me to prison. I picked up my bag and prepared to walk back into the battlefield. I did not even make it to the country club. The battlefield came directly to my front door. I arrived back at my townhouse to quickly change out of my business suit and into something appropriately pastel and submissive for the bridal luncheon. As my rideshare pulled up to the curb, I saw a sleek black luxury SUV idling directly in front of my driveway. The tinted window rolled down with a soft mechanical hum, revealing Beatrice's perfectly contoured face. She was not at the country club sipping champagne with her socialite friends. She was sitting outside my house, her eyes locked onto me with the cold intensity of a predator who had just realized her prey was wandering too close to the edge of the fence. Before I could even unlock my front door, she was out of the vehicle and marching up my front steps. Her driver stood by the SUV, an intimidating presence clearly designed to enforce whatever agenda she had brought with her. "Clara, we need to talk," Beatrice commanded, completely ignoring standard social pleasantries. She brushed past me the second I opened the door, stepping into my foyer as if she owned the property. She did not bother to take off her designer coat. She walked straight into my kitchen, dropped her expensive leather handbag onto my quartz island, and unzipped it with sharp, aggressive movements. I closed the front door, maintaining my steady breathing. I knew exactly what had happened. Nate had panicked. After I hung up on him, he realized he could not break my bank's security freeze over the phone. He had called his mother in a state of financial desperation, and Beatrice had immediately taken matters into her own hands. "Nathaniel called me," Beatrice stated, her voice tight with barely concealed fury. "He told me about your little banking mishap. I must say, Clara, your inability to manage simple vendor payments is profoundly disappointing. We are less than 48 hours away from the largest social event of the season, and you are triggering fraud alerts like a careless teenager." I immediately slumped my shoulders, looking down at the floor to project absolute shame. "I am so sorry, Beatrice. I just got flustered with the florist's routing numbers. I feel terrible for stressing Nate out right now." Beatrice let out a harsh, dismissive sigh. "Apologies do not process wire transfers, Clara. Action does. Nathaniel is currently drowning in portfolio reviews and dealing with very demanding investors. He does not have the bandwidth to babysit your financial incompetence. Because you have effectively frozen your own liquid assets, the caterer and the venue coordinators are threatening to halt their services. We are not going to allow your clerical errors to humiliate the Blackwood family." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She slapped it down onto the kitchen island. She flipped it open, revealing a stack of dense legal documents, heavily marked with bright yellow "Sign Here" tabs. "This is a durable power of attorney," Beatrice announced, sliding a heavy gold pen across the counter toward me. "Nathaniel's legal team drafted it 30 minutes ago. It grants him temporary, uninhibited executive control over your personal accounts and any corporate entities associated with your name. It allows him to manually override your bank's security freeze by presenting himself as your legally appointed financial proxy. I stared at the document. The sheer audacity of the ambush was breathtaking. They were terrified. The prenuptial agreement trap was meant to trigger automatically after the wedding ceremony, quietly absorbing my father's LLC in the background. But because I had locked my personal cash that morning, Nate's immediate liquidity crisis had forced their hand early. They needed a bridge loan to survive until Saturday, and they were trying to legally hijack my signature to get it. I picked up the document and scanned the first page. The forensic accountant in me read the legal framing with morbid fascination. It was not a temporary proxy for wedding vendors. It was a blanket authorization. If I signed this piece of paper, Nate would have the legal authority to take out massive corporate loans in my name, liquidate any property I owned, and transfer unlimited funds into his offshore Cayman accounts before we even reached the altar. Beatrice tapped her manicured fingernail impatiently against the quartz countertop. "Sign it, Clara. We do not have all day. The notary is waiting in my car outside." I hesitated intentionally, letting my hands tremble just enough to look anxious. "Beatrice," I murmured, my voice wavering. "This looks like a really broad legal document. Are you sure Nate needs all this power just to pay the florist? I mean, I can just go to the bank on Monday like they told me." Beatrice's eyes flared with intense toxic rage. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume suddenly suffocating. "Let us get one thing absolutely straight, Clara," she hissed, her polished facade dropping completely. "You are marrying into a dynasty. You bring absolutely nothing to this table except a modest local background and a painfully average career. Nathaniel is offering you the world, and you are questioning his lawyers over a standard administrative form. If you do not sign this document right now and prove that you trust the man who is graciously elevating you out of your mediocre life, I will personally see to it that this wedding is canceled. I will ruin you socially, and Nathaniel will never speak to you again. Do you understand me?" It was the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. She was threatening to take away the glittering prize she thought I was desperate to keep. She thought she was breaking my spirit. She did not know she was handing me the exact weapon I needed to finish them. Because of the covert meeting I had held with Arthur Pendleton just 2 hours earlier, I had absolutely zero corporate assets left to my name. My father's LLC belonged entirely to Lucas. My personal cash was hidden behind a secondary firewall that even a power of attorney could not breach without dual verification. The document sitting on my kitchen island was a loaded gun with no bullets. I looked up at Beatrice, letting a single tear slip down my cheek for dramatic effect. I picked up the heavy gold pen. "You are right," I whispered, my voice thick with manufactured defeat. "I am so lucky that Nate is willing to take care of me. I completely trust him." I clicked the pen and signed my name on every single yellow tab. I executed the document flawlessly, legally binding my non-existent assets to Nathaniel's control. I pushed the signed papers back across the island. Beatrice snatched them up with a triumphant, predatory smirk. She had won. She had conquered the weak, submissive bride. "Good girl," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension as she shoved the folder back into her designer bag. "Now go put on some makeup. You look terribly washed out. The driver will take me to the notary and I will see you at the luncheon. Do try to act like you belong there." She turned on her heel and marched out of my townhouse, slamming the front door behind her. I stood alone in my kitchen, the silence rushing back in. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. I looked at the spot on the counter where she had placed the fraudulent trap. They thought they had just secured their escape route. They had no idea they had just signed their own federal confessions. I took a moment to stand in the quiet of my kitchen, letting the adrenaline metabolize into pure, focused energy. The power of attorney document was now in Beatrice's manicured hands, speeding toward a notary who would make it official. They were going to try to access my father's LLC using that piece of paper, only to find a corporate void. It was a beautiful trap. I picked up my phone and sent a heavily encrypted text to Naomi. The eagle took the bait. I signed the proxy. Naomi replied a minute later with a single target emoji. The federal investigators would love the fact that Nate and Beatrice had actively attempted to forcefully commandeer my assets just 48 hours before the wedding. It established a clear, desperate timeline of fraud. I went upstairs and changed into a soft blush pink dress I had bought specifically to appease Beatrice. It was modest, appropriately expensive, but not overly flashy, exactly what she deemed suitable for someone of my station. I applied light makeup, making sure I looked slightly tired, playing up the image of a stressed-out bride who had just been scolded into submission. The country club was a sprawling estate, with manicured golf courses and valet parking. I handed over my keys and walked into the private sunroom where the bridal luncheon was being held. The room was flooded with natural light and filled with 30 of Beatrice's closest friends. They were the wives of the investors, the matriarchs of the funds Nate was draining. As I walked in, conversations hushed slightly. Beatrice was standing near the mimosa bar holding court. She looked at me expecting to see a broken, humiliated woman. I gave her exactly what she wanted. I hurried over to her, my posture deliberately submissive. I reached out and gently touched her arm, looking at her with wide, grateful eyes. "Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice soft but loud enough for her immediate circle to hear. "I cannot thank you enough for coming to my house today. I was so overwhelmed and your guidance was exactly what I needed. You always know exactly how to handle a crisis. I feel so incredibly lucky to have you to look up to." Beatrice's eyes widened fractionally. She had expected resentment, or at least sullen compliance. She had not expected public worship. Her massive ego instantly swallowed the bait. She puffed out her chest, adjusting her pearl necklace with a smug, satisfied smile. "It takes a certain kind of woman to manage the pressures of our world, Clara," she said loudly, ensuring her friends were listening. "I am just glad you had the sense to listen to reason. Nathaniel needs a partner who understands her place and lets him lead. You did the right thing today." I nodded vigorously, adopting an expression of absolute reverence. "You are completely right. I do not know what I was thinking trying to handle the bank myself. Nate is the financial genius. He gets that brilliant strategic mind directly from you. I just want to be a supportive wife. I am so relieved he has you to help him navigate the complicated legal side of things." The women surrounding us cooed in approval. They nodded, sipping their champagne, completely validating Beatrice's superiority. Beatrice practically glowed. She was basking in the absolute submission of her future daughter-in-law. I had voluntarily handed her the crown, publicly admitting my own inferiority. By feeding her narcissism, I completely blinded her to the threat I posed. Narcissists cannot perceive danger from someone they believe they have entirely conquered. The luncheon proceeded like a masterclass in psychological warfare. I sat at Beatrice's right hand, the designated place of honor. For 2 hours, I engaged in a tactical campaign of ego inflation. Whenever someone complimented the floral arrangements, I quickly redirected the praise to Beatrice, telling everyone how she had single-handedly saved the aesthetic of the wedding. When the wife of the tech billionaire Nate was defrauding asked about my career, I downplayed my forensic accounting firm. I called it a simple bookkeeping job and emphasized how eager I was to step back and support Nate's massive corporate ambitions. Beatrice took every opportunity to offer me unsolicited advice on high society etiquette, marriage, and household management. I swallowed every insult disguised as a lesson. I thanked her for pointing out that my posture needed work. I agreed with her when she suggested my makeup was a bit too pedestrian for a venture capitalist's wife. I played the eager, naive student sitting at the feet of the master. I made her feel like a god. By the time dessert was served, Beatrice was entirely disarmed. The aggressive, predatory woman who had stormed into my townhouse hours earlier was gone. She was replaced by a smug, overconfident matriarch who believed she held my leash with an iron grip. She leaned over to me as the waiters cleared the plates, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, Clara, you are learning," Beatrice murmured, a genuine note of approval in her tone. "When Nathaniel first brought you around, I had my doubts. I thought you were entirely too stubborn and painfully common." but you are showing a remarkable capacity for obedience. If you keep letting us guide you, you might actually survive in this family." I looked down, projecting a shy, grateful smile. "I just want to make you and Nate proud, Beatrice. I will do whatever it takes to ensure the family's financial legacy remains secure. I trust your judgment completely." It was the most loaded statement I had ever delivered. I was looking the architect of my intended destruction right in the eyes and promising her that her financial legacy was perfectly secure. Her legacy of fraud, embezzlement, and a looming federal indictment. She smiled back, patting my hand condescendingly. As the luncheon finally concluded, the guests began to depart, offering me air kisses and hollow congratulations. Beatrice instructed her driver to bring the SUV around. She turned to me one last time before stepping out the grand double doors of the country club. "Get some sleep tonight, Clara. Tomorrow is a very big day. We have a lot of paperwork to finalize before you walk down that aisle." "I will be ready," I replied, my voice sweet and utterly devoid of the venom pulsing through my veins. "I cannot wait for tomorrow." I watched her luxury SUV pull away, disappearing down the manicured driveway. The performance was over. The psychological warfare had been a complete success. I had neutralized the mother and trapped the son. They were heading into Saturday morning utterly convinced of their victory, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already crumbled. I walked to my rideshare, my mind shifting instantly from the battlefield of the country club to the final execution phase. The defensive perimeter was established. The offensive weapons were loaded. All that remained was the ceremony itself. I was ready to become a bride, and I was ready to become an executioner. Saturday morning arrived with a brilliant, cloudless sky that felt entirely too optimistic for the destruction I was about to unleash. The bridal suite at the St. Regis was a sprawling expanse of mirrored walls, white leather couches, and panoramic views of the city. The room was humming with the chaotic energy of a high society wedding preparation. Hairstylists wielded curling irons like weapons, makeup artists blended expensive foundations, and my 4 bridesmaids fluttered around in matching silk robes, sipping mimosas and giggling about the extravagant reception to come. I sat in the center of the madness, an island of absolute stillness. My hair was being pinned up into a complex, elegant twist, and my face was being painted to project the flawless, blushing innocence Nate expected. I stared at my own reflection in the vanity mirror. I looked like a pristine porcelain doll, exactly the kind of unthreatening accessory Beatrice and her son desired. Behind my calm eyes, however, a digital countdown was ticking away the final hours of their freedom. The trap had been verified. The federal tip had been processed. The agonizing wait was almost over. A sharp knock on the heavy suite door momentarily paused the chatter. One of my bridesmaids, a college friend who had been completely charmed by Nate's tailored charisma, hurried to answer it. She returned a moment later carrying a sleek velvet box resting on a silver tray. A card of heavy cream cardstock was tucked neatly under the ribbon. "It is a gift from the groom," she squealed, her eyes wide with manufactured delight. "Open it, Clara. Let us see what the financial genius bought his beautiful bride." I offered a practiced, modest smile and took the velvet box from the tray. I slid the ribbon off and opened the heavy card. The handwriting was Nate's unmistakable, arrogant scrawl. "For my perfect wife, on our perfect day. Wear this and remember that I will always take care of you. All my love, Nate." The irony was so concentrated it practically burned the paper. I set the card aside and flipped open the velvet lid. Inside, resting against the dark satin lining, was a massive diamond tennis necklace. The stones caught the morning sunlight pouring through the suite windows, scattering brilliant prisms across the walls. My bridesmaids gasped in collective awe, murmuring about how incredibly lucky I was to be marrying a man of such immense generosity and wealth. I stared down at the necklace, keeping my face perfectly composed, while my mind instantly shifted into audit mode. To the untrained eye, it was a masterpiece of high-end jewelry, a glittering testament to a venture capitalist's endless disposable income. To a forensic accountant who had just spent 48 hours mapping a $4 million offshore money laundering operation, it was a glaring piece of physical evidence. I reached out and lifted the necklace from the box. The metal felt slightly too light. The settings holding the stones were not platinum, but a high-grade rhodium-plated alloy. I looked closer at the center stone, letting the light hit the facets. Real diamonds have microscopic imperfections, natural inclusions that prove they were forged in the earth. This stone was entirely too perfect, too clear, and the light refraction lacked the sharp, icy depth of genuine carbon. They were moissanite stones, perhaps mixed with lab-grown synthetics. It was an exceptionally good counterfeit, likely custom, made by an underground jeweler who catered to men trying to project massive wealth on a rapidly shrinking budget. Nate had bought a fake diamond necklace to appease his bride, funneling the real cash straight into the Cayman Island accounts for Rachel and the twins. He was standing in his own hotel suite right now, adjusting his bespoke tuxedo, entirely convinced that his counterfeit necklace had successfully bought my blind loyalty. He believed I would put this cheap glass around my neck and walk down the aisle proudly displaying the fake wealth he used to mask his criminal insolvency. I felt a cold, sharp thrill of absolute power wash over me. I did not throw the fake jewelry across the room. I did not point out the cheap alloy settings to my swooning bridesmaids. I simply smiled, lifted the heavy string of fraudulent stones, and fastened the clasp securely around my neck. "It is absolutely breathtaking," I lied, my voice dripping with overwhelming gratitude. "He really does think of everything." The makeup artist leaned in with a powder brush to add the finishing touches to my cheekbones. "You look like royalty," she whispered, stepping back to admire her work. "The dress, the hair, the diamonds. It is going to be the wedding of the century." I looked at the counterfeit stones sparkling against my collarbone. It was the perfect accessory for this specific occasion. I was wearing a fake necklace to a fake wedding to marry a fake man. The symmetry was almost poetic. I stood up from the vanity chair, the heavy silk of my wedding gown pooling elegantly around my feet. The dress had cost a small fortune, paid for from the joint accounts I had completely drained yesterday morning. The vendors had already cashed the final checks before I locked down the funds. Every single detail of this opulent morning was fully funded by the money Nate had stolen from his elite investors. He had financed his own public execution. The door to the bridal suite opened again, but this time there was no cheerful knock. Naomi stepped into the room. She was not wearing a silk bridesmaid robe. She was dressed in a sleek, formidable emerald gown that looked more like armor than wedding attire. The chaotic chatter of the bridesmaids instantly died down as Naomi crossed the room. Her presence commanded an immediate, terrifying respect. She did not look at the makeup artists or the scattered champagne flutes. Her eyes locked directly onto mine. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze dropping briefly to the glittering fake diamonds resting against my neck. A small, knowing smile touched the corner of her lips. She understood exactly what the necklace represented. She understood the psychological warfare I was engaging in by choosing to wear it. "We need a moment alone," Naomi announced to the room. Her tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. The bridesmaids and stylists quickly gathered their tools and filed out into the adjoining sitting room, pulling the double doors shut behind them. The suite plunged into a heavy, expectant silence. I turned to face my sister-in-law. The defensive planning was over. The trap was fully operational. The only thing left to determine was the exact timeline of the explosion. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with a fierce, predatory light. I waited for her to speak, knowing that the words she was about to deliver would signal the point of absolutely no return. I waited for her to speak, knowing that the words she was about to deliver would signal the point of absolutely no return. Naomi reached into her emerald clutch and pulled out her secured smartphone. The screen displayed an encrypted messaging application she utilized for highly sensitive corporate litigation. "I just received the verified confirmation from my contact inside the federal prosecutor's office," Naomi said, her voice a low, steady hum that immediately commanded the bridal suite. "The Securities and Exchange Commission processed our anonymous dossier late last night. They ran the forensic algorithms you built. They verified the exact routing numbers to the Cayman Island accounts and flagged the severe $4 million deficit in the venture capital escrow ledgers. I felt a sharp electric spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream, and the Bureau authenticated the offshore banking mandates bearing Rachel's signature. Naomi replied, stepping closer until she was speaking directly into my ear. They have a federal judge's signature on a multi-agency arrest warrant. The white-collar crime division is mobilizing their field agents right now. They are coordinating a simultaneous tactical raid on Blackwood Capital's Manhattan headquarters and the offshore proxy servers. Are they coming here to the venue? I asked, glancing at the heavy suite door. They are en route to the cathedral as we speak, Naomi confirmed, a fierce predatory glint in her dark eyes. They want the managing director in handcuffs before he can access a private jet, and our tip specifically highlighted his immediate flight risk. The federal agents are timing their arrival to trap him in a completely controlled environment. You just have to keep him standing at that altar long enough for the tactical teams to secure the perimeter of the building. We need to lock him in the box. I looked at the digital clock displayed on the vanity mirror. We had exactly 40 minutes before the ceremony officially began. The meticulously choreographed timeline we had constructed was holding perfectly. Are you absolutely ready for the fallout? Naomi asked, placing a warm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Once those heavy church doors open, you are walking into a room full of arrogant billionaires who are about to lose a massive percentage of their overall wealth. Beatrice will try to tear you apart. Nate will panic and lash out. I am a forensic accountant, I answered, meeting her intense gaze in the mirror. I thrive in the fallout. I want to look him dead in the eye when his entire financial empire collapses into dust. Naomi smiled, stepping back to let me stand. Then let us go execute a fraudster. The journey from the luxury hotel to the historic cathedral was a blur of flashing city traffic and tense, heavy silence. I rode in the back of a pristine vintage luxury vehicle, a car Nate had rented specifically to project an illusion of generational wealth. The leather seats felt ice-cold against my skin. As we pulled up to the towering stone steps of the cathedral, my brother Lucas was waiting for me on the pavement. He looked incredibly handsome and resolute in his tailored black tuxedo. He opened the car door and offered his arm. The corporate transfer is locked tight, Lucas whispered as I stepped out into the crisp air. Arthur filed the final divestment paperwork at the county clerk's office an hour ago. You own absolutely nothing, Clara. You are totally bulletproof. Thank you, Lucas, I said, gripping his arm tightly. Now walk me down the aisle so I can finish this operation. The heavy wooden doors of the cathedral loomed ahead of us like a fortress. The distant swelling chords of a massive pipe organ vibrated through the solid stone floor beneath my heels. The wedding coordinator, a frantic woman clutching an oversized clipboard, fussed over the long silk train of my dress and signaled for the bridal party to begin their procession. I stood in the shadowed narthex, with my brother listening to the classical music reach its dramatic, sweeping crescendo. Then the massive double doors swung open. A sea of elite high society guests rose to their feet. The cathedral was breathtakingly ornate, adorned with thousands of imported white roses and flickering pillar candles that cast long dancing shadows against the stained glass windows. I stepped forward, gripping Lucas's arm, and began the slow, measured walk down the long velvet runner. I kept my chin perfectly level, projecting the serene, radiant confidence of an oblivious bride, but my eyes were actively scanning the packed pews. I saw Harrison, the tech billionaire, smiling warmly in the third row. I saw the prominent real estate tycoons and the retired executives. They were dressed in bespoke suits and designer gowns, entirely unaware that the man standing at the altar had systematically drained their life savings to fund a secret family in the Caribbean. I was walking through a congregation of imminent financial victims. In the front row, Beatrice stood radiating a triumphant, toxic arrogance. She wore an ostentatious silver gown that aggressively rivaled my bridal dress. She looked at me with a smug, victorious expression, utterly convinced that my signature on her fraudulent power of attorney document had secured her family's wealth. She thought she had successfully conquered the weak accountant. I offered her a soft, compliant smile, feeling the heavy counterfeit diamond necklace resting coolly against my collarbone. Finally, my gaze locked onto Nate. He stood at the end of the aisle looking like a cinematic masterpiece. His tuxedo was flawlessly tailored. His hair was perfectly styled. As I drew closer, I watched him employ his most potent manipulation tactic. He let a single, highly choreographed tear slip down his cheek. He raised a hand to wipe it away, playing the role of the overwhelmed, deeply emotional groom. Several wealthy women in the front pews murmured in audible adoration at his sensitive display. It was a brilliant sociopathic performance. 2 days ago, that tear would have absolutely shattered my heart. I would have believed he loved me unconditionally. Today, I recognized the tear for exactly what it was. It was a biological reflex summoned by a con artist to complete a massive financial transaction. I matched his performance perfectly. I let my own eyes well up with manufactured moisture. I allowed a bright, radiant smile to stretch across my face as Lucas handed me off at the altar. Nate reached out and took my hands in his. His palms were slightly sweaty, betraying the intense hidden panic of a man desperately waiting for a massive cash injection to save his fraudulent fund. "You look absolutely stunning," Nate whispered, his thumb gently stroking my knuckles. "I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with you." I looked directly into his eyes, searching for any trace of genuine humanity. There was absolutely none. Behind the charming facade, I saw only a cold, calculating void. He was mentally reviewing his flight itinerary to the Cayman Islands. He was planning the precise moment he would file the divorce papers and pin his felony charges on my accounting license. "I promise you, Nate," I whispered back, my voice soft but incredibly sharp, "this day is going to change your life forever." The officiant stepped forward, opening his leather-bound book, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. Nate turned his attention to the front, standing tall and victorious. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, waiting for the federal agents to arrive. The officiant cleared his throat, his voice projecting through the high vaulted ceilings of the cathedral. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, in the presence of God, and these witnesses, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over the congregation. Nate held my left hand, his thumb rhythmically stroking the flawless counterfeit diamond ring he had given me. I stood perfectly still, breathing in the scent of thousands of imported white roses that filled the sanctuary. It smelled like a funeral. The officiant continued with the traditional monologue about trust, mutual respect, and the sacred bond of transparency between partners. Every single word was a blazing irony. I glanced out of the corner of my eye at the massive arched stained glass windows, anticipating the flash of red and blue police lights. They were cutting it incredibly close. The ceremony proceeded at a steady, agonizing pace. Naomi sat in the front row on my side of the aisle, her posture rigid, her phone resting discreetly on her lap. She caught my gaze and gave a microscopic shake of her head. The tactical teams were encountering city traffic. We needed to stall. Nate shifted his weight, radiating eager anticipation. He was minutes away from legal access to my father's pristine corporate infrastructure. He leaned in, whispering that I was the most beautiful bride he had ever seen. I simply nodded, calculating the precise moment to detonate the narrative. The officiant turned a page in his heavy leather book, adjusting his microphone. "Marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, discreetly, and in the fear of God." He looked out over the crowded pews filled with the ultra-wealthy victims of Blackwood Capital. "Therefore, if anyone can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now, or else hereafter forever hold their peace." Absolute silence blanketed the cathedral. It was the traditional rhetorical pause, a formality no one actually expected to be interrupted. Beatrice shifted in her front row seat, a look of profound satisfaction settling across her features. She looked at her son, then at me, her eyes communicating total victory. Nate let out a soft, relaxed exhale, his grip on my hand loosening slightly. He thought he had crossed the finish line. He thought the heavy iron doors of his trap had finally slammed shut. I took a single deliberate step backward. I pulled my hand out of Nate's grasp. The sudden movement caused a subtle ripple of confusion among the bridal party. Nate blinked, his perfect smile faltering as a crease of annoyance appeared between his brows. He reached out to take my hand back, whispering for me to step forward. I ignored him. I looked down at the massive cascading bouquet of white orchids and rare lilies in my hands. It was heavy, wet, and incredibly expensive. I opened my fingers. The bouquet plummeted, hitting the solid stone floor of the altar with a resounding wet thud. White petals scattered across the velvet runner. A collective gasp echoed from the front pews. Before the officiant could react, before Nate could process what was happening, I stepped smoothly past my stunned fiancé. I reached out and took the wireless microphone directly from the officiant's hands. He was too shocked to resist, stepping back with wide eyes. I turned to face the congregation. The cathedral was dead silent now. Hundreds of high society guests, elite investors, and corporate tycoons stared at me in profound bewilderment. Beatrice was halfway out of her seat, her face flushed with sudden, uncontrolled rage. She opened her mouth to intervene, but Naomi immediately stood up, crossing her arms and blocking Beatrice's direct line of sight to the altar. Naomi's presence, an African-American corporate litigator radiating absolute authority, forced Beatrice to freeze in her tracks. Nate let out a nervous, forced laugh, grabbing my elbow. He tried to speak directly into the microphone. "Clara, baby, what are you doing? Did you write surprise vows?" I violently yanked my arm away from his grip. I leveled a glare at him so utterly devoid of warmth that he physically recoiled. The mask dropped entirely. He looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years, he saw the real woman standing in front of him. He saw the forensic accountant. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive stone cathedral, sharp, clear, and perfectly amplified. "I have a cause," I announced. "I have a very specific, highly documented cause why this marriage cannot proceed." The murmur that swept through the pews was instantaneous. Harrison, the tech billionaire, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. The other venture capital clients exchanged alarmed glances. Nate Blackwood asked me to marry him because he told me he loved me. I continued pacing slowly across the altar. He told his mother Beatrice that he was marrying me because my spotless accounting license and my late father's commercial real estate company would serve as the perfect collateral to absorb a massive corporate debt. He told his mistress, a woman named Rachel, that he was marrying me so he could frame me for federal fraud, file for divorce, and flee the country with her and his twin children. Chaos erupted. It was not a gentle whisper, but a violent surge of noise. Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking as she demanded someone cut the microphone. Nate lunged forward, his face pale with sudden, blinding terror, but my brother Lucas stepped out from the groomsmen line, planting himself firmly between Nate and me. Lucas was larger, stronger, and burning with righteous fury. He shoved Nate back with a hard, flat palm against his chest. I did not flinch. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, projecting authority over the rising panic. "To the family and friends who came to celebrate a union today, I apologize for the deception. But to the investors of Blackwood Capital sitting in the center rows, I suggest you pull out your phones and call your legal representation immediately. Because the man standing behind me is not a financial prodigy. He is a thief who has stolen your life savings, and I am going to tell you exactly where your money went." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute, a vacuum waiting for a spark. I looked directly at the third row. "Harrison," I said, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "2 months ago, you wired $1.5 million into Blackwood Capital's primary escrow account. You were told it was being parked in a high-yield tech incubator. It was not. Within 48 hours of your deposit, Nate sliced your capital into 30 different microtransactions. He masked them as legal retainers and consulting fees, funneling them into 7 different dummy corporations registered in Delaware." A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Harrison stood up, his face flushed with sudden understanding and mounting fury. Nate lunged forward, his eyes wild with a feral, desperate panic. "Shut her up," he roared, completely dropping his polished facade. "She is having a psychotic break. Turn off the microphone." He charged at me, his hands reaching for the audio equipment, but he never made it past the altar steps. Lucas intercepted him with devastating force. My brother drove his shoulder into Nate's chest, lifting the groom off his feet and slamming him backward into the marble baptismal font. Nate hit the stone with a sickening crack, gasping for air as Lucas pinned him by the lapels of his bespoke tuxedo. "Do not even think about taking another step," Lucas growled, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. "You stay exactly where you are, and you listen to my sister." I did not even blink at the physical altercation. I kept my eyes locked on the investors. In total, I continued pacing the altar. "Nate has systematically drained $4 million from your collective portfolios over the last 8 months. He used the Delaware shell companies to wash the funds, blinding your quarterly reports with fabricated returns. But the money did not stay in Delaware. It was wired to an offshore banking institution in the Cayman Islands, directly into an account controlled by a shell company called Oceanic Ventures Limited. The cathedral erupted into a chaotic symphony of outraged shouts and frantic whispers. Several younger executives were already pulling out their smartphones, frantically dialing their personal attorneys. "Oceanic Ventures is not a tech incubator," I announced, raising my voice to cut through the mounting uproar. "It is a holding company whose sole authorized beneficiary is a woman named Rachel. She is Nate's mistress. She has been his mistress for 5 years. They share twin children. Your $4 million did not go into the market. It bought a sprawling $3 million beachfront mansion in an exclusive gated community in the Caribbean, and it currently funds their exorbitant private lifestyle." "Lies," Beatrice shrieked from the front row. Her perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, her face twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic rage. "She is a hysterical, lying gold digger. Nathaniel would never do such a thing. She is making all of this up because she knows she does not belong in our family." I looked down at my future mother-in-law. I felt a cold, triumphant smile stretch across my face. "I do not expect anyone here to take my word for it," I said smoothly. "As a forensic accountant, I prefer to rely entirely on primary source documentation." Naomi, standing just a few feet away from Beatrice, pulled a small remote from her emerald clutch. She had spent the morning coordinating with the cathedral's sound engineer, slipping him a generous cash tip to connect her encrypted device to the central audio system. She pressed a single button. The heavy acoustic speakers mounted high on the stone pillars crackled to life. Suddenly, the unmistakable voice of Beatrice Blackwood echoed through the massive church, crisp and undeniable. "Did you wire the hush money to Rachel?" The entire congregation froze. The outrage was instantly replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. Beatrice clamped her hands over her mouth, her eyes bulging in stark terror as her own voice condemned her. Then Nate's voice filled the sanctuary, booming from the speakers with cold, sociopathic clarity. "It is done, Mom. I sent it through the offshore proxy this morning. She agreed to keep the kids out of state until after the ceremony." Nate stopped struggling against Lucas's grip. He sagged against the marble font, the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. He stared at the speakers in absolute defeat. The recording continued to play, broadcasting their entire conspiracy to the very people they were actively robbing. The congregation listened as Beatrice warned her son about the Securities and Exchange Commission sniffing around the escrow accounts. They listened as Nate detailed his exact plan to use my pristine accounting license and my late father's limited liability company to absorb the $4 million debt. They heard his dark, cynical laugh as he explained how he was going to frame me for federal fraud, file for divorce, and take a private jet to the Caymans with his secret family. When the audio clip finally ended, the silence in the cathedral lasted for a fraction of a second before the room exploded. It was sheer pandemonium. Harrison, the tech billionaire, vaulted over the wooden pew, pointing a trembling finger directly at Nate. "You stole my money, you bastard!" Harrison roared, his face purple with rage. "I will bury you. I will dismantle your entire firm by Monday morning." Other investors joined the shouting, their voices merging into a deafening chorus of threats and demands for restitution. Women in designer gowns were physically pulling their husbands back from storming the altar. The polished veneer of high society completely shattered, revealing the raw, violent anger of people who realized they had been utterly played. Beatrice tried to back away from the crowd, her hands raised in a desperate defensive gesture, but the investors surrounded her. The women who had just attended her lavish bridal luncheon were now screaming in her face, demanding answers about their family portfolios. She looked frantically toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the church, searching for an escape route. Nate made a sudden, desperate lunging motion, attempting to break free from Lucas's hold and sprint toward the side exit near the sacristy. He knew his only chance at survival was reaching a non-extradition country before the federal warrants could be processed. But Lucas anticipated the maneuver perfectly. My brother grabbed Nate by the collar of his expensive tuxedo jacket and forcefully shoved him back down onto the cold stone steps of the altar. "You are not going anywhere, Nate," I said, walking slowly down the altar steps until I was standing directly over him. I looked down at the man I had almost married. He was trembling, gasping for breath, completely stripped of his charm and arrogance. The counterfeit diamond necklace around my neck felt incredibly light. "You thought I was just a boring middle-class spreadsheet jockey," I told him, making sure my voice carried over the screaming investors. "You thought I would be too blinded by this shiny fake world to notice the trap you laid for me. But you forgot the most basic rule of accounting, Nate. Every single transaction leaves a permanent trail. You cannot balance a ledger with lies." Nate stared up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish caught on dry land. He finally realized the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure. Before he could formulate a single pathetic excuse, a sound pierced the heavy oak doors of the cathedral. The wail of federal sirens. The noise started as a distant scream and rapidly escalated into a deafening roar, completely surrounding the entire historic building. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively against the stained glass windows, casting frantic, chaotic shadows across the polished marble floor. The investors who just moments ago were ready to tear Nate apart with their bare hands suddenly parted like the Red Sea. They instinctively backed away from the altar, seeking immediate physical distance from the radioactive epicenter of a massive federal crime scene. Nobody wanted to be caught standing too close to the target of an active federal raid. The heavy cathedral doors did not just open, they were violently breached. A tactical team of heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation flooded into the sanctuary, their heavy boots hitting the stone floors with terrifying synchronization. They were accompanied by field agents wearing windbreakers bearing the distinct gold lettering of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The United States government had arrived, and they had brought the entire cavalry to secure the perimeter. "Nobody move," a senior agent commanded, his voice booming with unquestionable authority over the remaining murmurs of the crowd. He held a thick stack of verified arrest warrants in his left hand. "Nathaniel Blackwood and Beatrice Blackwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and severe violations of the Securities Exchange Act." Beatrice let out an ungodly shriek that echoed through the vaulted ceilings. As two female federal agents approached her, she began wildly thrashing her arms, her expensive silver gown tearing audibly at the shoulder seam. "Get your hands off me!" she screeched, her aristocratic facade entirely shattered into a million jagged pieces. "Do you know who I am? I am a Blackwood. We are pillars of this community. You have the wrong people. Arrest her." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. "She is the accountant. She managed the books. She is the one who stole the money." Naomi stepped smoothly into Beatrice's line of sight, completely blocking her view of me. Naomi reached into her emerald evening clutch and calmly produced her corporate litigator identification card, holding it up so the federal agents could clearly see her credentials. "My name is Naomi, and I represent the whistleblower who provided the encrypted dossier your agency is currently using to execute these warrants. As an officer of the court, I highly recommend you inform your suspect that anything she says will be used against her. She is actively attempting to establish a false narrative to federal officers." Naomi leaned in closer to Beatrice, dropping her voice to an icy, lethal whisper. You have the right to remain silent, Beatrice. I strongly suggest you use it immediately, because your massive arrogance has already handed us a perfectly recorded confession. Beatrice clamped her mouth shut, her chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths as the cold steel handcuffs snapped securely around her wrists. The formidable matriarch of the Blackwood dynasty was instantly reduced to a sobbing, humiliated criminal in front of every single person she had ever tried to impress. At the altar, Nate had completely collapsed. The fight drained out of him the second he saw the Federal Bureau of Investigation windbreakers closing in. Lucas took a deliberate step back, releasing his iron grip on Nate's tuxedo, allowing the federal agents to pull the groom forcefully to his feet. They roughly spun Nate around, forcing his hands behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked with a sharp, echoing finality. Nate looked over his shoulder at me. The arrogant, untouchable venture capitalist was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. He tried to use his final manipulation tactic, falling back on the emotional leverage he thought he still possessed. Clara, please. Nate begged, genuine tears of terror streaming down his face. I love you. I really love you. I was going to fix it. I was going to put all the money back. You have to tell them I was going to fix it. Please, baby, do not let them take me away. I looked at him with absolute clinical detachment. I reached up and unclasped the heavy, sparkling counterfeit diamond necklace he had given me that morning. I let the cheap alloy and fake stones fall from my neck. It hit the marble floor right at his feet, shattering one of the synthetic settings upon impact. I am a forensic accountant, Nate, I said, my voice carrying the steady, chilling calm of a judge delivering a life sentence. Your biggest mistake was assuming I only knew how to calculate numbers. You forgot that I also know how to balance the scales. Enjoy your flight to the Caymans. I turned my back on him. I did not watch as the federal agents marched him and his mother down the long aisle. I did not look at the stunned faces of the investors or the horrified expressions of the remaining bridal party. I linked my arm through Lucas's arm, and together with Naomi, we walked out of a discreet side exit, stepping into the crisp, clean air of a perfect Saturday afternoon. We left the smoking ruins of the Blackwood Empire completely behind us, without a single backward glance. 6 months passed in a blur of swift legal retribution. The federal justice system moves with terrifying speed when presented with a fully compiled, heavily documented whistleblower dossier. Nate pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal fraud to avoid a lengthy, highly publicized trial. He received a 15-year sentence in a maximum security facility. The offshore proxy accounts in the Cayman Islands were seized and fully liquidated by international authorities. Rachel, realizing her tropical lifestyle was funded entirely by stolen venture capital money, immediately cooperated with the FBI in exchange for total immunity, leaving Nate completely abandoned. Beatrice faced an equally brutal reality. The federal government seized her massive Connecticut estate, liquidating the property, the luxury vehicles, and all her offshore assets to pay restitution to the defrauded investors. She managed to avoid prison time by turning state's evidence against her own son, but she was entirely exiled from her elite social circles. She now lives in a tiny rented apartment, completely bankrupt and utterly alone. As for me, I am sitting in the corner office of my family's commercial real estate company. The business my father built is thriving, fully protected, and expanding rapidly under Lucas's brilliant management. Naomi recently made senior partner at her corporate law firm, fueled in part by her masterful handling of the Blackwood financial implosion. I am wearing a sharp, tailored power suit. I am no longer the quiet, accommodating woman desperate for approval. I am a highly specialized professional who successfully dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy without shedding a single tear. I learned that the sweetest revenge does not require screaming or violence. True justice is simply turning on the lights, handing over the raw data, and walking away with your head held high while the architects of your destruction burn in the fire they built. Have you ever discovered the dark, hidden truth about someone you were planning to marry, or a toxic family that tried to bring you down? How did you execute your own escape? Tell me your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of absolute justice. Clara's meticulously executed escape from a devastating betrayal teaches us a profound lesson about the true nature of power and emotional resilience. When faced with the ultimate deception from the man she loved and a future mother-in-law who constantly belittled her, her initial reaction was not to shatter into predictable chaos. Instead of allowing heartbreak to dictate her actions, she embraced the cold, unyielding power of the truth. Narcissists and manipulators thrive on emotional turmoil. They rely on their victims' dramatic reactions to maintain control, shift the blame, and spin their own deceptive narratives. Clara's story demonstrates that the most devastating weapon against gaslighting is absolute emotional detachment. By stepping back and viewing her relationship not through the lens of a grieving bride, but through the objective analytical lens of a forensic accountant, she dismantled her abuser's illusion piece by piece. Furthermore, her journey powerfully underscores that our self-worth is never defined by those who seek to exploit us. Beatrice and Nate systematically tried to make Clara feel small, mediocre, and entirely dependent on their elite social standing. Yet her ultimate victory did not require her to stoop to their level of cruelty, vengeance, or public hysteria. True justice was achieved by simply securing her family's legacy, establishing ironclad boundaries, and letting the raw, undeniable data speak for itself. It is a brilliant reminder that we are never obligated to absorb the toxic projections of others. We always possess the right to build our own lifeboats, surround ourselves with genuine protective allies, and calmly walk away, leaving our abusers to burn in the fires they ignited. Take a step back to rely on the absolute facts to protect your peace, and please share your own strategies for reclaiming your power in the comments below.